Det här är en fågel!
Vi får slå himlen icke.
Perkele, se kostet!
Hello everyone, no pre-show this time. We're going in without any foreplay at all. We're a bit late, my apologies. I was out of town, so I had to reschedule the stream later than usual, and even then I barely made it in time. So I can't blame anyone else this time for being late. Welcome back to another episode of The Longhouse, a show about culture, art, politics, etc., all with a true right Nordic perspective. There, now that's out of the way. This time we're talking about Yuval Noah Harari, someone I think you, Luddic Path, referred to as the man Sam Harris wishes he was.
Yeah, that's right, actually. I think this episode is going to follow very nicely from the previous episodes, the first one with Dawkins and the other one with Harris, because it covers a lot of the same topics, say like, evolutionary thought, big picture ideas, politics, and so on. I mean, Harari is like the sort of self-proclaimed, big thinker among big thinkers. So I think... I mean, if you look at Harari and you look at his profile, ethnically, academically, and so on, he sort of has everything that I think Sam Harris wishes he had in terms of being able to do this kind of really big picture stuff and actually having success with it instead of just making a bunch of throwaway books and then just going back to podcasting.
Yes. And Leo Borealis, I am sorry, but we have made you sort of rediscover your hate for this man.
Yeah, that's highly unfortunate, I must say. I have forgotten exactly how much I hated his books, but, well, now I have reread them, and, well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And good evening to the chat.
Yes, good evening to the chat. Good evening, Jay Burden. A shout out real quick. I think a conversation me and him did the other day will go live a couple of hours after we end our stream. So I'm going to post a link probably at some point so you can head over to his channel and enjoy a video. A very good conversation, I think, that we had. Yeah,
I saw it pop up in my feed. I've been... watching some of Mr. Burden's interviews lately, some with Thomas 777 among them, and well, it's good. So
yes. Monophthalmos is in the chat, and he graced me with this image before a couple of hours ago, which, according to a commenter, puts his height at about 168 or something centimeters. Anyway, someone's talking about the Queen. Yes, I've heard about her unfortunate passing, but I don't think we will be spending any time on that today, really.
No, this is neither the time nor place, I think.
Yes. Okay. So, Yuval Noah Harari, a very interesting thinker is my conclusion, really. We've spent some time looking into his stuff. I've read Sapiens. Luddic Path, I know you have read Homo Deus. Did you read Sapiens as well at some point?
Yeah, I remember I actually read Sapiens 4 years ago. And I was less academic at the time, so I mean, I didn't think that much of it in terms of trying to validate the historical claims that were made and so on. Although there are certain things that I found peculiar, and I took note of him. So when you brought him up as like this guy should be like the next stream, I was actually quite excited to try to dive back in again. And this, yeah, he's a very interesting character, especially with the ties that he has to the World Economic Forum. Because you see a lot of that on the internet if you Google his name on YouTube or something, and it's all of these interviews that are just it all ties him into the WEF basically, and the comment section is just basically like Christian's revelation posting just all the way down.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
pretty
he's talking about depopulating the planet. So
Yeah, and I think we'll get into that later. But my sort of, if I'm gonna give my view of him in a sentence, it's that his analysis is pretty similar to ours, but his response is wildly off the mark. He really just wants to clamp down the pedal and go even harder.
Yeah, I think he's very much a mouthpiece of what academic agent calls like the techno-globalist faction of the world elites. In terms of his thinking, I think that his, especially Homo Deus, that we'll get into later, is a very clear articulation of the vision of like the techno-globalists in terms of the future and what they see, coming down the pipe. But what you said about like his analysis being similar to ours, I think it's because he is. He seems to make up a lot of stuff, but he is at least able to process multiple viewpoints and not come at issues from a point of complete delusion, like someone like Sam Harris. Basically, he will actually acknowledge, say, if someone like us, if a thinker of a different school has a criticism of his ideas, he will at least try to incorporate it or answer that criticism instead of just making up straw men for days.
Yeah, or just falling back into friend-enemy distinctions. And
yeah,
I see here
certainly
in the chat, Julius Flavius saying depopulation, that doesn't sound too bad. Well, that's one of the things with Harari. Depopulation, that doesn't sound too bad, but the reasons for why he wants depopulation is where we get into sort of the weird stuff.
Yeah. It's more.
I'm sorry. Continue, Luddic.
Yeah, it's more than just depopulation. I mean, it's really transhumanism, and post-humanism articulated in these very stark terms. It's not something that is going to sold into the mass man as something to be excited about. This is just something that's actually, thinking back, I remember the video that Morgoth did about like the World Economic Forum and how they must have the worst PR managers of all time because everything they bring up is just completely dystopian nightmare fuel. And the way that Harari presents a lot of these kind of post-humanist visions of the future, it is just like this very cold, detached delivery of this kind of completely nightmarish hell vision of the world that will be appealing to people who own a lot of capital and the people who own artificial intelligence and so on. But to the rest of us, there's really nothing to look forward to other than sitting in the pod with like the VR headsets and drowning in virtual reality.
I joked.
Your cerebellum shipped to hell.
Yes.
He also liked that. I saw in one of his most recent pieces. And he was also very positively inclined towards the Neuralink project. Gee, wonder why.
I wonder why indeed. And I've joked in our private chats, Luddic, that it at times seems like he's writing like just DMs to Klaus Schwab or someone of his equal stature. And if you look up any of his talks on YouTube, etc., it's always TED Talks at sort of like influential meetups. It's big tech companies he's talking for. It's all of these like high up circles that he usually attends.
He does, but I've looked at more of his stuff, and he seems to have access to almost everybody at this point, which is also quite interesting as to why this guy is getting so much attention. I think, of course, we talked about Sam Harris and how did he get so big, but with this guy, we'll get into more of his biography later, but he is basically, he has a PhD, but he is just sort of like a history teacher in Tel Aviv in Israel. And the book Sapiens is something that he wrote to just be kind of a summary of like his introductory course to history. And there's very little in terms of what he's done in terms of the subject of history that is new or original or anything like that. He's just kind of slapped together a lot of ideas in terms of how to process the past and the future and so on. And that has just given him access to like the World Economic Forum. I mean, you see him with like he's talking to Mark Zuckerberg, even has interviews like with Natalie Portman and certain celebrities. He has like a course for children, I think, with like this, Sapiens for Kids and a certain foundation that he runs and so on. So he's a quite busy guy.
You have to remember one thing, especially in Sapiens, that what he is proposing is essentially the most shit-lib of shit-lib versions of human history. It is essentially, all the Enlightenment talking points. It's the gradualism. It's we'll get into it, but you have to remember that he gets this access because of what he is bringing forth.
I do agree, because even though Sapiens might be sort of like a layman's introduction to these ideas, and maybe not like an academic work, he gets away with a lot of things by sort of just writing from within the truth regime, because he just makes moves that are like, oh, that's a huge assumption, my dude.
This huge assumption are also based on, well, let's just call it what it is. Shit science. It's faulty data. Many of the proposals that he move forward for, they're actually no evidentiary. They're essentially within the scientific community fringe ideas that no one really takes seriously. And he's using this essentially to, mold his narrative.
Yes.
The ideas that he is bringing forward, because otherwise there would be, let's just say, problems with the shit-lib view of history if he actually looked closer at certain things and realized that now we're having a problem here.
Yeah.
And he does credential himself, just the last point, he does credential himself very much within the frame of being a scientist, even though he is a historian. Not really hard science by any definition, but looking at all these interviews, he always just talks about himself like as if he's doing science, basically. And he really isn't. He's just doing like this kind of big idea speculation stuff that it's a fun thing to do. And I think this is sort of a nice way to make your hobby a job, if you're like to be a kind of an armchair guy and talk about your large ideas about humanity going forward and so on. But it's not science.
That's all it is, speculation, right? And he's been called semi-seriously a prophet, and I referred to him in a tweet I did. I referred to him as the prophet of the elites, because I see it as you said, it's a way of selling this future to the masses and to signal, to the other movers and shakers of the techno-globalists where the wind is blowing. But you've also subtitled him here as the CEO of Big History. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, it's something I came up with just last minute, but it seemed like the most memeable title to have, because like the genre that these books are, both Sapiens, Homo Deus, and of course he has another book out as well that's called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, which I didn't have the time to read, unfortunately, so that won't be covered here unless Leo or Walrus has read that. But the genre is basically called Big History. That's it is exactly what it sounds like. It's like if you want to talk about history and there's like this very, very broad strokes, instead of the more typical, let's say, academic historian who will specialize in some like specialize on the Black Plague or the Bronze Age, the Sumerian civilizations and so on, and they know all of the details. So this is much more of a sort of very, very big picture, speculative type of history. And it's much bigly, and it's much further away from science than a lot of these other disciplines. History is not something that I'm like super big on, but it would be interesting to maybe get some input from Leo Borealis along the way in terms of like his kind of, what do you call it, the heuristic, this kind of hermeneutics of his approach to history and so on, and maybe compare that to some of these more like reactionary or the historians that are popular in the reactosphere, like Carlyle or
The strange
Spengler.
sort of thing that he uses a lot to his advantage, you know, you mentioned the in Sapien specifically working within the shitlib frame, is that when he sort of takes the position of looking back and doing that thing where you apply sort of the mind of today with the mind of a million years ago, and uses that to work his way backwards to current year. That's how you get a lot of weird assumptions that he makes about how humans work, and why righteously, Leo, you called me out on that a couple of streams ago when I made like a faulty allusion to Evola, where you would, you know, obviously see that the way he paints the humans of a million years ago to be something quite different, or something that Evola would have been against as something we are capable of achieving.
Yes, more or less. Well, we are capable, perhaps, of simulating that as a side note, but not in the way that he does it. I think that the idea that you have to realize that the heuristics and the method that he's using is essentially believing himself standing, you know, at the top of a very, very flat-sided mountain where he can survey everything, and
Yes.
he makes some small concessions here and there that but we don't know, and all of that thing, and then he essentially goes into the next breath. But here is how it was, and then you get the shitlib version.
Exactly.
So it's like, well, he makes this small, you know, academic gesture. No, I'm presenting multiple ideas, but he really isn't. He's just,
he spends one page saying this is contested, and then he spends 20 pages sort of explaining.
Yeah, you know, he's putting fig leaves so small on this one that you will need microscopes to see them, and then you realize it's not fig leaves; it's some other kind of species of plant. But anyway,
Yes.
that's a bit of a side note. We'll get into it once we get to the meat of things, I guess.
All right, do we just want to head over to the next slide here? This is his husband, is that correct, Luddic Path?
Yeah, that is
that is
correct.
one. Ooh, the Fed posting is hard here. That is one happy merchant. Let's put it that way.
I feel the picture says a lot about the state of media as well, because he's being interviewed by Anderson Cooper, who is like a very respected media figure, but he is also a gay man who's gay married with like 2 surrogate children, right? So you have 3 G's and 2 J's in this photo. And I mean, of course, I think it just speaks for itself. But I mean, I wanted this slide basically to talk a little bit more about his biography, and I'm just going to do like the lazy thing and read off his early life from Wikipedia here.
Wonderful early life section.
Yeah, I mean, of course you could. I mean, do I have to tell what ethnic group this guy is?
Where you might get the stream nuked.
No, I mean, I think like everybody
for reading from Wikipedia.
Oh, you are not safe just reading from Wikipedia.
But I guess like everybody who watches this show like knows what ethnic group he is a part of, so I think that's pretty much self-explanatory. So he was raised in Kiryat, Israel, basically. I mean, it says here on Wikipedia that he was able to teach himself to read at age 3. And then he was in some sort of program for intellectually gifted children. He had to, of course, defer mandatory military service in the IDF. I mean, I can't imagine why. I wonder why this guy would not be in the military. I mean,
yeah, that's strange.
This is a strange thing. But he did, pursue basically, and sort of an academic program studying international relations. Then going on to basically get a PhD at the university in London. And there's not a whole lot more in terms of, in terms of his personal life. He's a lot more like shrouded. It'd be interesting if anybody has has some intel on this guy, because I mean I spent most of the time just trying to read the book basically, and I mean I haven't even seen the full like 60 minutes interview, but I think he's sort of smart enough to kind of shelter his private life. I mean, not only is he a gay man, but he's also sort of a dedicated vegan. He's not a practicing Buddhist, but he apparently does like two hours of meditation every day. So I mean, there's something about like this lifestyle that I think contributes to the sort of detached demeanor and approach that he has to history. Where, as we talked about on the previous slide, as Leo said, like he thinks he's sort of standing outside of it all. I mean, you really get this impression that he is just outside of history. He's just looking in at it and explaining to you like the entire process over it. And I really think though, if you are like this kind of if you deviate this much from the regular person in the street, both in terms of like lifestyle, sexually, dietary, in terms of the people you spend your time with and so on. I mean, you in some sense you are detached from the people around you, and it does give you a way to approach it, but at the same time you're still not outside of it, right? He's still very much like in the moment, in like this current year process. When you see all of these people that he's surrounded with, he's very much a part of the ilk in terms of the the media elite and the elites of the that are able to be the mouthpieces of the system. See, I don't know if any of you have some more scoops on his on his personal life or his bio.
Nothing other than probably the reasons for his veganism come across very clearly in Sapiens being actually anti sort of modernity capitalism, anti-neoliberalism, strangely enough. But we might get more into that later.
Yeah, it's really weird. It feels more like a construct, to be honest, than the real reason. And
Maybe.
Just a question: what is it with all of these fucking shit libs being, fake Buddhists? I know that Buddhism is like the gayest of all the religions, but well, it's not even a religion per se. But why are all the shit libs always going like 20% Buddhist? I meditate. Ooh.
I don't know. I suppose if you're a person who sort of cuts yourself ostensibly off of spirituality, and then you sort of do a weird square peg in a round hole operation to get yourself back into some semblance of spiritual life, is Buddhism.
I actually just think it's because like a lot of these people are very much in the elite, and they're always looking for like the newest thing. So these people are going to have like the most cutting edge diets, and they're going to doing all this kind of Joe Rogan stuff, like cryo, what do you call it, like cryogenesis, like this sort of within these cryo chambers, or they're going to do like flotation tanks, like different types of massages and so on. They're going to be doing mind altering drugs to change their perception, and like this sort of modern Buddhism, it slots very well into that, where it goes into this performance culture where they think that if they meditate for a certain amount of time, it's going to increase their kind of mental sharpness by 2%. Or something like this. At least that's sort of my take on why this is so popular, because they really do see themselves as elite, and they do a lot of this kind of elite stuff, whether it works or not. It's sort of accepted among those people that meditation is like a performance enhancer, right?
Yeah.
Flotation tanks, the ayahuasca, and shoving honey candied walnuts up their ass, stuff like that. But that's probably the thing also. It's primarily performative. It's meant to be seen and not to be done.
Yeah, I can see that. It's part of the image more than it's an actual spiritual decision.
Yeah, but all of the, let's say the actual religious practice or the metaphysics is cut off from it. So it is just this kind of, in some sense, there's also this kind of hedonist aspect to it, to some kind of spirituality, where people who seek out Buddhism is that they want to do the meditation because it's like a pleasurable experience. In a sense, they get some sort of more higher kind of subtle type of pleasure from isolating themselves, maybe an hour or something, and just thinking about humming sound. or something like that. So yeah, it's like the performance, the status, and the kind of in a sense like the sort of high openness, pleasure seeking. Let's see. I'm reading through his Wikipedia here. There's this other things that I notice here. He talks about Sapiens that we'll get into on the next slide, where he says like his inspiration for writing Sapiens, aside from doing an introductory course, is actually after reading Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, which I haven't read myself. But I remember like being online like in very early 4chan and looking at these politics boards, and like that was a big thing when that came out, especially among like these sort of far right people, because that I think that book sort of proposes the idea that European superiority is kind of happenstance. It's really just a product of like environmental factors and things that exist in the kind of European environment in a sense, and the European landscape that allow them to gain sort of strategic superiority to dominate other parts of the world. And say if Africa had those things, and like they would be in the dominant civilization and so on. I don't know, Leo, are you familiar with Guns, Germs, and Steel?
Yeah, well, I've looked slightly at it. It's the thing is that book is kind of an amalgamation of a number of theories that doesn't really jive all that well with each other. So it's kind of a meh publication, to be honest. But it does have some interesting points. Rather than the problem is that it applies it kind of oddly, because in the end you do have the unmistakable fact that society, and thereby perhaps not humans as much, but society as well, is very much shaped by geography, and
Right.
Also the psychology, if you will, of the individual is often highly, well, high performing, should we say, individual is often molded more heavily by geography than someone who is has less cognitive capacity, and this is actually being measurable. I mean, so essentially a French peasant and an African peasant would be on the lower scale of things, as an example, will be quite similar in certain respect, but say an aristocrat from Cape Town and an aristocrat from Moscow will be distinctly different in outlook and how they tackle problems. So you don't really see it at the tail end of the scale. You see it at the upper end of the distribution curve.
That is a very European way of looking at it too, though, isn't it? I'm not saying it's wrong or even critiquing it. I haven't encountered that thought before. But anyway, we're here to talk about Harari. Is there anything else we want to do about, his personal history before we...
I guess I would just like to add a point on the veganism, because like you said in the Sapiens, he explains his veganism by just being kind of anti-capitalist. But he has a chapter in Homo Deus as well about veganism, where he talks about it's really more like this other phony reason he has that pigs are actually very smart. He talks about these animals have evolved to be social, and they've evolved to be smart, and they've evolved to sort of interact with each other, and we're kind of just squeezing them into these kind of small pits and pumping them full of hormones and so on. And that's kind of unethical, because he has more of this utilitarian view of the world, right? Where what is real is like the individual and the individual's pain, and where institutions can't feel pain and nations can't feel pain and so on, so they don't really matter in like in terms of ethical decisions. They're just kind of there as useful fictions. But what actually matters is trying to like reduce the pain of as many of these living creatures as possible. And I mean, this also comes off as very phony to me, because he spends the prior chapter in Homo Deus talking about how human pleasure is all reducible to chemicals, basically, and in the future, all human pleasure is just going to be chemicals being injected right into human beings instead of actually coming from an interaction with the real world. So why he wouldn't have that conclusion with animals is that, okay, why is animal suffering a problem with factory farming? You could just inject them with happy chemicals and you've solved that problem. But
This is very strange how that's a different, outlook when it comes to animals. But he's basically using that to make the argument that the humans don't deserve it. You see what I'm saying? Because the neoliberal or the industrialization run amok, right, has caused this to happen to animals. Because I think on the right too, we can agree that the way that they treat the cows to get the milk on the industrial scale is neither healthy for them or us, spiritually and physically. But to then say that because of that, us humans, don't deserve the free will, and we really messed up, and now I'm gonna take over and I'm gonna make sure this is set right.
I think this is once again, the one of those many small fig leaves that he spreads across his writings. These small caveats that this is the same thing, but not really, and then he goes around doing exactly this. I think this is really more indicative of a person completely bereft of principle and completely bereft of real moral conviction. He doesn't really
that might
have
be true, but my takeaway from
he essentially has to inject that kind of dimension in his writings here and there, and that's why it becomes such a jangled mess, because he doesn't have if you will, a red thread running through his own thinking. Then you get these kind of counter signals within his own arguments.
Yeah, I can see that. I think my takeaway from his talks and his book Sapien is basically, which is a sentence that is very weird for me to say because it sounds like it's coming from our side. It is, the masses don't deserve free will, and they don't want it either. So unless we take the reins, someone else will. But he's saying that, to Klaus Schwab instead of Curtis Yarvin, right?
Yeah, true. But the difference here that we also most often remember is a moral one. Because the difference between saying this, say, within a feudal context is that these people can't handle free will, therefore we must lead them. It's essentially a position of love.
Okay, yeah, I'll add that the difference is that he's saying we're in this position, we've realized that this doesn't work, so we're just going to have to drug them all and alter their DNA instead of, looking at
and kill
before.
2/3 of them,
Yeah.
But humanely. We will euthanize them.
Of course. We'll create a servant class of people who will own nothing, and they'll be happy because we have programmed them to be happy.
He goes a lot more into this in detail in Homo Deus. So when we get to that, I will try to make the case for him, basically. But I mean, that's a big part of that book that, at least the parts that are not completely ridiculous, where he really tries to deconstruct humanism, basically, and liberalism, and knowingly so, basically saying that, this was a construct that existed in the last century, and that it was useful then. But like with the advances, both in terms of the issues that are facing humanity now and the new advances in science and the ideological changes, liberalism is basically meaningless in the current age that we live. So we have to move on to this more sort of post-human, transhuman sort of like data religion type world. But I think we've spent enough time on him biographically. I want to get into. Yeah, I mean, maybe some of these slides might be redundant because we end up, talking about or covering so many of them before we even get there. But I put this one together as really like what I see as some of these sort of threads that seems to come up and up again in his books. And I don't know if this is something you can confirm reading Sapiens. I mean, the intersubjectivity stuff is something that he keeps bringing up. And this is not a concept that he came up with himself. I think it's some guy named Husserl, a philosopher, that talked about the idea of basically the dimension of things that are true because everybody believes it's true. So something like currency, for instance, or laws, or social norms that you basically it's not something that exists as it doesn't have a simple space-time location.
No,
But
I see where you're going.
yeah.
It's something he brings up actually quite early in *Sapiens*, where he says that everything from money to religion is real because enough humans believe it's to be so, right?
Yeah, more or less. Let's just say that Harari does not do metaphysics at all.
No, I mean, this is like his version of metaphysics. Basically, this is how when he talks about intersubjectivity, you can just replace it with metaphysics in his writings, and it would still make sense. So when he talks about like the intersubjectivity of a society, he talks about like this is the metaphysic that they believe in, and the stuff that they take for granted 100%. And I mean, he does concede in a sense that this is completely necessary. Like, you can't have a society without intersubjectivity or metaphysics, in a sense. You need, just from a practical standpoint, a certain amount of constructions that exist, that everybody just agrees on, that they don't have a space-time location, they can't be touched or felt or sensed in that way. But if you're going to organize large-scale human societies, this has to be there. Like, if you're just going to rely on basic kinship, then it's impossible to organize anything beyond maybe 100 and 150 people.
Oh yeah, yes. He does that. I didn't mean it in that way. I mean it that he doesn't do metaphysics in the way that he doesn't really approach the subject from that it actually holds any truth. It's just a constructivist lie that is necessary for society to function.
Yeah, it's very much he just says that humans do these things because they feel things. that's almost quoting him, I think.
Yes, and it's 100% utilitarian as well. That's how it's always presented. That this comes out of, I guess it's almost like Marxism or dialectical materialism. That the intersubjective kind of network of meaning has to come out of some practical need, whether it be like the cognitive revolution or the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution. Like, these things just create new intersubjective layers that can function alongside with the new technology in the society. So, I mean, the animal care stuff we already talked about with the veganism there. Extreme generalizations is, of course, quite typical. I mean, he will at certain times actually use historical data, but like you both commented, he will just spend pages and pages going off on tangents and just babbling about stuff that he came up with 30 minutes ago, just generalizing how people feel and how they think and how ideologies work and so on.
Yeah, and then we come to back to the extreme generalization within those arguments.
Yeah,
and I think that is also a way to one size fits all kind of approach.
and I don't know if this is something that gets better in Homo Deus, but I can safely say that he usually goes on a bit of tangents, but maybe we'll get to it when we get to *Sapiens* as a book specifically. And the romanticizing of hunter-gatherers is something that comes up a lot.
Do you have any input on that, Leo? Because I mean, I haven't read enough history to really comment on it. It seems like he looks at the utility or kind of the what society delivers to people as being kind of like a curve, in a sense, like a sort of a shape of a horseshoe, where like the hunter-gatherer society delivered a lot of actual happiness to people, and then with the agricultural revolution it just goes downward, it just gets worse, and the industrial revolution, and then it goes back up again, like with the
the advent of liberalism. He kind of does that thing. So but he does that, I would say, from almost a Marxist materialist dialectic. It's only about that people were happy because they had more stuff and they had to work less.
Yeah,
And it's like, and he's talking like, the hunter gatherer had like a 3-hour work day, and it's like, they didn't have work days. You stupid man.
So it's not even into the sort of noble savage stuff. It's more just, oh yeah, but they didn't have to do farm work, so of course they were happy. It's a very strange argument.
If you scrape the surface a little, you get back into that the dialectic of of essentially maximizing pleasure. I think Luddic will. This probably comes up in Homo Deus as well, that the utilitarian goal of humanity in some ways is to maximize pleasure and minimize, and in the future, I guess, completely eliminate the idea of suffering.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's even more exaggerated than you think. Really, he goes into the idea of not only the right to life and liberty and happiness. Like he talks about, having the right to happiness, period. The right to always be happy, basically, as sort of a project that humanity is going to pursue in the future. But in regards to the hunter-gatherer stuff, the sort of pitch that he gives in Homo Deus about this stuff is that he says that he makes it sound like you're going on a permanent vacation. Basically, if you're hunter-gatherer, it's like one day you're in a canoe and you're going down the river, and the next day you're picking berries, and then you're hunting the wolf and so on. It's like, and if you he compares that to a factory worker in industrial England, where the only thing you're doing is 12-hour work days and sleeping in dirt. Basically, so it makes it sound quite pleasurable to be in one of these hunter-gatherer tribes, just for the variety and the experience economy.
Yeah, something like that. He goes off on those small little tangents that has nothing to do with reality. It's more like his own personal construction, I think. Well, not only his. I mean, quite a lot of shitlibs who buy into this kind of thing has this kind of idea that there was a 4-hour work week when you were a mammoth hunter. It's like no, not really. I mean, what do you think you had? You went up at 8 a.m. and okay, now we're gonna hunt mammoth for 4 hours and then we go home. It's like, but there come back to this that Walrus said earlier, the idea that he has, that he is essentially gazing upon the entirety of human history with his very modern eyes.
Yeah.
And he lived from his ivory tower. Oh, this is exactly how it was. And I think that also comes from this underlying Marxist materialist dialectic of how you view things, because I think that is essentially his fundamental socio-political position in the elimination of suffering and the maximization of pleasure until
because I am somewhat acquainted with that idea, from the Marxist lens, because I mean, there's no capital accumulation in these hunter-gatherer societies, right? I mean, you just have to pick stuff up and eat it and then move on. The idea of the Ur-communism.
Yeah, but you have to remember that what do you call it? What do you call it? Now my brain is standing still, stamping on the spot and tooting a small horn. God damn it! The thing where the workers take over the proletariat dictatorship. There we go.
The means of production.
Yeah. Well, essentially, when the proletariat become the great dictatorship and control everything.
Oh, okay. Yep.
That's essentially in the Marxist dialectic the transitory phase before you get real, fully automated communism.
Gay space communism. Yeah, it's the one before the utopia.
Yeah, the stage after that, the real idea is to get in a post-economic world, real fucking Star Trek stuff.
Yeah,
where you can essentially, maximize pleasure and completely annihilate suffering from the human experience. That is essentially the goal. So if you take a look at not on the dialectic of how to get there, but rather realize that this is the end goal, and he is working from that end goal backwards in a sense.
Yes,
Then
very much how it feels.
Yeah, then you can understand where he's coming from a bit easier. I think not to get hung up on the toolkit, so to say.
Oh, sorry, I clicked on the slide. Do we just want to go
Yeah,
ahead?
I mean, I just wanted to then mention, like with the hunter-gatherer stuff. I mean, we did the drug stream where we do cover the other angle as well. I mean, you have the ur-communism angle toward the hunter-gatherer society, but there's also like this sort of feminist, matriarchal cope angle towards the hunter-gatherers, where they believe that like the patriarchal society basically is like the natural result of the agricultural revolution and the kind of the accumulation of stuff, basically.
Yeah.
Like I mean, with borders and private property and that stuff, that's what creates patriarchy, right? So when you have hunter-gatherer society, that's like basically gender equality, or in some cases actually matriarchy.
He touches on this in
And
Sapiens in the early chapters, I think, because he has like a passage about the children belonging to the entire tribe, and not just you can't know how. There's a very strange passage where it's like, well, the women have sex with so many dudes that children basically become communal because no one knows who the real father is.
Yeah, there's
a wild take to make without any sort of
and
evidence.
Harari has never been out hunting, because if ever had, he realized that probably a tribe of hunter-gatherers would be extremely more patriarchal than an agrarian society with a small town.
Yes,
it's it would rather hypercharge the differences between masculine and feminine rather than abolish it. I mean that there we are but then we are back at fully automated luxury communism within some kind of Pleistocene Garden of Eden, which never existed, of course. That's essentially what he is kind of working back from here, that everything was so abundant that people didn't need to work, and all that dangerous megafauna that he mentions on and there was of course not so dangerous that you needed the male hunting party also needed for work like a 24/7 military force, just keeping everybody alive. So yeah.
And just as a finishing point, with someone like Harari, there's no point in idealizing this hunter-gatherer society. I mean, the day-to-day life for him in that kind of society would be just like grug smash small big nose man. That's but yeah, I put this slide in there as well, where it's like you mentioned this Leo Borealis, where he will just make small concessions on certain points. So I did put these in here. I don't know if there are more labels that I should have added, but I mean, at least in Homo Deus, he does concede the idea that let's say basically people in the past. This is like the label on the right here, that people in the past, because of natural selection pressures, would have been basically stronger and smarter than you are. Like they the regular person you would have met 200 years ago, 500 years ago, would likely have been much more functional than you and stronger. Which is, I mean, you can contrast that with someone like the new atheist crowd, or someone like Sam Harris, where he basically says that no, I mean, people from 200 years ago were just retards. They didn't understand anything, and
essentially he kind of has to do that because he does have some chapters there on the brutishness and high attrition rates, and morons will get themselves killed. If there aren't cars around, there will be lions around somewhere, and well, they will do stupid shit and get themselves killed. So the idea that people in the past were on average smarter and stronger than you, yes, that's true, but that's only because the lower 30 to 50% of the normal distribution scale didn't make it past to adulthood, or at least it was rare. So by sheer rate of attrition, you get say a higher lowest level of everyone who's like 20.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
We'll just look through some of these other ones here. Let's go from the top. The modern life may not actually be better than traditional life. This is something he concedes when he talks about, utilitarianism and the development. Is that the amount of.
I might have a passage from *Sapiens* about that, if you want me to read it.
Yeah, do it.
I'm going to bring it up because it's basically like half a page. Hang on. Share screen. And here we go. The pursuit of an easier life resulted in much hardship, and not for the last time. It happens to us today. How many young college graduates have taken demanding jobs in high-powered firms, vowing that they will work hard to earn money that will enable them to retire and pursue their real interests when they are 35. But by the time they reach that age, they have large mortgages, children to school, houses in the suburbs that necessitate at least 2 cars per family, and a sense that life is not worth living without really good wine and expensive holidays abroad. What are they supposed to do? Go back to digging up roots? No, they double their efforts and keep slaving away. One of history's few iron laws is that luxuries tend to become necessities and to spawn new obligations. Once people get used to a certain luxury, they take it for granted. Then they begin to count on it. Finally, they reach a point where they can't live without it. Let's take another familiar example from our own time. Over the last few decades, we have invented countless time-saving devices that are supposed to make life more relaxed. Washing machines, vacuum cleaners, dishwashers, telephones, mobile phones, computers, emails. Previously, it took a lot of work to write a letter, address and stamp an envelope, and take it to the mailbox. It took days or weeks, maybe even months to get a reply. Nowadays, I can dash off an email, send it halfway around the globe, and, if my addressee is online, receive a reply a minute later. I've saved all that trouble and time, but do I live a more relaxed life? Sadly not. That's it. It goes further on, but it's pretty much the same point.
I have a similar quote. I don't know if you can bring up the Google Doc there and you find the quote that's named on happiness and energy.
Let's see here.
So it's a little bit shorter, but it does go into the same territory.
On happiness and energy.
Interesting to compare notes. So it's under, say, the human agenda, the right to happiness, and then there we go. So let's say,
even if we are somewhat happier than our ancestors, the increase in our well-being is far less than we might have expected. In the Stone Age, the average human had at his or her disposal about 4,000 calories of energy per day. This included not only food, but also the energy invested in preparing tools, clothing, art, and campfires. Today, Americans use on average 228 calories of energy per person per day to feed not only their stomachs, but also their cars, computers, refrigerators, and televisions. The average American thus uses 60 times more energy than the average Stone Age hunter-gatherer. Is the average American 60 times happier? We may well be skeptical about such rosy views.
So a lot of the stuff that he brings up in that chapter, it could be like Ted Kaczynski writing it, like that type of stuff, but he ends up with, like you said, the completely opposite conclusion that the show must go on. Basically, we have to keep pushing for more pleasure, basically constantly stimulating, making more money, increasing GDP, and so on. So it's a very bizarre combo where like these counterpoints are acknowledged, but ultimately we're just going to keep going in the direction we're already going.
Yeah, we're just going to lean hard on techno-futurism, and then we're going to create a servant class of people and somehow, work it out.
Yeah. Jeez. What a nut.
So, I did put in one.
I was just going to go to the next quote. You do it.
Yeah, let's see. Superior organization is what makes humans better than animals. I mean, because in Homo Deus, he has like a wholehearted endorsement of elite theory. Actually, if you bring up the quote sheet again, there is basically it goes under, say, the human spark, and the quote is called cooperation slash elite theory.
Okay,
So
I'll bring it up.
think this is a sort of similar point that you can find in the a lot of the stuff Academic Agent has covered, and in the populist delusion and so on. But it's interesting to get it confirmed from the multiple sources.
History provides ample evidence for the crucial importance of large-scale cooperation. Victory almost invariably went to those who cooperated better, not only in struggles between Homo sapiens and other animals, but also in conflicts between different human groups. Thus, Rome conquered Greece not because the Romans had larger brains or better tool-making techniques, but because they were able to cooperate more effectively. Throughout history, disciplined armies easily routed disorganized hordes, and unified elites dominated the disorderly masses. In 1914, for example, 3 million Russian noblemen, officials, and business people lorded it over 180 million peasants and workers. The Russian elite knew how to cooperate in defense of its common interest, whereas the 180 million commoners were incapable of effective mobilization. Indeed, much of the elite's efforts focused on ensuring that the 180 million people at the bottom would never learn to cooperate. In order to mount a revolution, numbers are never enough. Revolutions are usually made by small networks of agitators rather than by the masses. If you want to launch a revolution, don't ask yourself, how many people support my ideas? Instead, ask yourself, how many of my supporters are capable of effective collaboration? The Russian Revolution finally erupted not when 180 million peasants rose against the Tsar, but rather when a handful of communists placed themselves at the right place and the right time. In 1917, at a time when the Russian upper and middle classes numbered at least 3 million people, the Communist Party had just 23,000 members. I'm not sure what happens there. The communists nevertheless gained control of the vast Russian Empire because they organized themselves well. When authority in Russia slipped from the decrepit hands of the Tsar and the equally shaky hands of the Kerensky's provisional government, the communists seized it with alacrity, gripping the reins of power like a bulldog locking its jaws on a bone.
And then
That is a stock elite theory.
The issue with reading Harari is that he, in making his windling arguments, he on occasion seems to be based, but then he comes to the end of his conclusion and it's not based at all.
Yeah, I'm probably sure that on the next page his point is that, you know, the communist revolution was good or something, right? So
no, the sort of the point of the chapter is actually a lot more insidious than that. It's sort of just breaking down humanism, basically, or breaking down the idea that individuals have value. Because he says that, like, the reason that human beings are valuable is because they can cooperate, and that's sort of it. There's no inherent value to the actual individual in terms of strength or intelligence or creativity and so on. It's all about the kind of shared story and the shared cooperation and the network, in a sense. That's what actually is valuable. Not the individual. That's the point of the chapter.
Right. And I mean, he's correct. But
I
the
don't
problem
disagree.
is that his conclusion is that he's the one who wants to be part of the elite that controls the rest of the world, right?
Yeah, the conclusion is eating the bugs and living in the pod.
Exactly.
So it doesn't really matter. Let's see. Let's go through these. I don't have specific quotes for all of them because the quotes would just be way too long. But the humanism is a religion of feels. It's a sort of funny point where he does go through multiple chapters trying to break down humanism and liberalism. Something I might get more into later, but you'll see this in a lot of these talks that he does as well, where he goes through this the sort of like standard talking points where he basically says that ethics basically in humanism is all about how people feel. If you look at something like gay marriage, it's something that used to be unpermissible because it's from a higher commandment. It was basically seen as immoral, but now it's all about like the feelings of the participants, and if both people think it's okay, then it's okay, and that's how morality works. And he says basically government works by democracy, which is really just how the most people feel at any given moment.
Yes.
Art in the modern world is about how people feel, like the sort of modern and postmodern art. If I say something is art, if I feel like it's art, then it's art. Whether it's like the urinal with the titles on it, or this kind of like pig's head on a tank or something. I mean, it's art is whatever I feel like. I mean, the economy is sort of arranged the same way. It's really the customer is always right. That it's sort of the feelings of the customer that get to determine what gets produced and what doesn't get produced. That is, it's kind of how that works. And education, where it's like the central goal of education. I mean, you'll see this if you talk to teachers. They want to teach people to think for themselves. In a sense, they think on behalf of their own feelings. So I mean, it is.
So not only doesn't he understand history, he doesn't understand economics either. but I think he has a quote here. Let me see if I can find it in *Sapiens*. It's when he goes on and about the I think it's quite telling. Let's see. Okay, here I have it.
What is the quote? What is he talking about?
Yet none of these things exists outside the stories that people invent and tell one another. There are no gods in the universe, no nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, and no justice outside the common imagination of human beings. I think that is kind of telling where he's coming from all this.
Yeah, and I agree. And humanism is a sort of difficult topic to tackle, where it's like no matter what sources I consult, I always find it difficult to get good definition of what humanism actually is. I mean, for me, I tie it into basically Enlightenment values, and especially in the post-World War II era, to human rights and human potentials. But I mean, of course, to Steelman, the humanist, they would, of course, say that the human being has a reason and has like an actual individual reasoning capability. And that's the reason why democracy is valid, or the liberal economics is valid, because they can actually make rational decisions. And it's not just, if it's all the feely feels, then it's just completely pointless. But I just think it's funny to see him go at it, because this is going to hit it hits a lot of the new atheists in the balls, basically, because they will be making the argument that religion is all about feels. It's all about your feelings, and you ignore the facts. But he just kind of turns that around and says that no, actually, like, your system is really that system that's about feels. Religion is actually about metaphysics and divine commandments that needs to be interpreted and lived by.
Then of course he turns around and says that it's all bunk, because he is who he is. And
yeah, like you said, I mean, he thinks that it's fiction anyway, so it's not anymore, like, none of these are more valuable to him. He doesn't think that human rights
it's not a value judgment. It's more of a as he see it, what do you call it, a rational analysis of the situation.
Certainly. So, I mean, the last quote, I mean, you also touched on that in your quote, Leo Borealis, with the humanity cannot survive without useful fictions. And, I mean, whether this is based or not, because I don't know, but I think it has kind of the same energy of the noble lie of Plato, and that's why I felt like it's like partially, it's just a little bit based. I don't know how you feel about that.
In *Sapiens*, I think that's further on in your quote, Leo, where he basically says that, when push comes to shove, something like the UN isn't real. It's all about, actual power. Everything else is just fiction.
Yeah. He goes into that. It's one of those little small fig leaves. It's like a bit of a throwaway line.
Yeah.
And then he turns it again around to why we need the UN, more or less.
Yeah, it's very strange that like a minute later he goes back and, oh yeah, but the UN is good. So
yeah. Like let's see here. Quote: "No one was lying when, in 2011, the United Nations demanded that the Libyan government respect the human rights of its citizens, even though the UN, Libya, and human rights are all figment of our further imaginations."
So you heard it here first. Harari said human rights aren't real.
Yeah, then in the next chapter, of course, he turns this argument on its head.
He does.
Not really that human rights aren't real, but why the UN as an organization is a good thing, and we should do this and that and so forth. Again, you can't, euthanize half of humanity with one still believing in, human rights. So, yeah.
So yeah, he's right for the wrong reasons. So
Yeah,
I think
he does that a
That
lot.
sums him up very well. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's all the takes that I have. If there's anything else, then
I have something
just
more,
feel
but
free to add.
we'll probably touch on it later because it ties into his strange obsession with mentioning servant classes. It feels like every time he mentions it in his books and in his talks, I feel like he's priming me for something. Yeah.
But going back to Sapiens, I mean, he does some really weird things. I mean, I don't understand why he does this. And this is like some very simple thing that he misrepresents. And I mean, it's like, say, for example, like the divergence between the chimp and the human.
Yeah.
He takes that up early and say, "Oh, it's like 6 million years ago."
I actually have that marked. I can actually read that quote, I think.
Yeah, but the only problem is that this is not really a thing. The genetic testing puts the span between 6 and 23 million years ago.
Right.
Because it's that imprecise. But here you can see again, his preference for, in a sense, taking a non-humanist stance. I wouldn't call it humanist, perhaps, but not a pro-human stance. It's always taking the worst option when he can take an option. It's like he's also taking the idea that humanity evolved from the Australopithecus species, the South apes.
Which when I read it, I had like a bell go off that that's something that's recently been at least called into question quite strongly.
It doesn't, and it's not really recently. It's more like it has hit public consciousness recently. It's almost 20 years research. That humanity doesn't really share almost any genetic material with the Australopithecus branch of man apes, if you want to use that kind of term. The thing is that, I think he puts that because it's a central key to the out of Africa theory, which is looking more and more to be disproved by modern genomic testing and mitochondrial DNA data.
He goes really hard on being like specifically Africa, which I also was like, that's the thing that's being called into question as well.
The thing is that essentially there are humans with Australopithecian originated DNA, probably from the Homo habilis species, but and that existed within the African subcontinent. The only problem with this that this genetic material does not exist within North American, European, or Asian subgroups. It only exists actually with peoples originating from sub-Saharan Africa, and it's a quite strong genetic marker, between 18 and 19% in various African populations, and Europeans and Asians have zero of Homo habilis genetics in that sense, because they are divergence. So what seems to have been happening is that it's not really an out of Africa theory. It's rather an into Africa idea. So that essentially the genetic data and some of this genetic testing is also going into validating some older archaeological finds within the Siberian Asian complex within the Central Asia, rather Central and Northern Asia, as perhaps a cradle for not perhaps the Homo species, but for Homo sapiens. So, and
Yes.
here's another thing to remember about the Australopithecines, is that they have a very different feet displacement. They have an arboreal feet arrangement, like let's say a modern orangutan. Essentially, that they don't have the big toe as we have it, but it's rather acting as a secondary thumb.
Mm-hmm.
And the time aspects here between these divergences, just a couple of million nodes, it's not enough time to have changed in such a way from that feet arrangement to our. It doesn't happen. Such dramatic changes does not happen on that small time scale. It just doesn't.
Yeah,
but that's a sidebar, because essentially when you can't draw genetic lineage, then that theory is dead, essentially.
Yeah, that's my point. If you're not sure, why are you asserting it? But that's sort of how he gets away with a lot in this book. He just sort of like says it, and then
Yeah.
that he's authoritarian or authoritative, I suppose, enough in his tone that as the author that it works out for him. The second chapter, we're not going to go chapter by chapter, but that's the one that touches on the feels are real kind of stuff. And I just wanted to I didn't have much to highlight that hasn't already been discussed, but I pulled up this just because he has this tendency to pull up graphs and stuff that almost look like shit posts. And here you have the Catholic alpha male abstains from sexual intercourse and childcare, even though there is no genetic or ecological reason for him to do so. It's just such a strange way of putting it. This is your mind on evolution, kids.
Yeah.
Evolutionary psychology, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I found this that I wrote up. He had this really interesting throwaway comment about the human morphology, the Homo sapiens morphology vis-a-vis the chimpanzee morphology, and that this was done to our more upright posture was to support the increased weight of our cerebellums, and that we kind of paid for all of this with neck and back aches.
Yeah.
You have never been to the gym, have you?
Yeah, right. Just go outside and it's fine. Walk in that's not even like a joke, the sort of that doctors have rediscovered, right? If you have back pains, go outside and walk in the woods. That's the best thing you can do.
Yeah. That's why you have neck and because you're in an unnatural position. You're meant to move around. But
in Harari's worldview, the solution isn't to go out into the woods. It's to we're just going to give you a tech spine or something.
Yeah, you need to go to
a cybernetic spine. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. He also completely goes around the small and rather pertinent fact of this evolutionary adaptation, which is that humans are not ambush predators. We're extreme persistent hunters, and that the morphology of the human as being hairless and being upright with the displacement arrangement of our limbs, say length of limb to length of back and so on, is essentially made to jog or walk fast for days on end without stopping.
Mm. And the muscles in our buttocks as well.
Yeah, it's extremely energy efficient for that kind of movement. And the forward-facing eyes and the large cerebellum is needed in a sense to be able to abstractly track prey that you can't see, because it's run away into the bushes across the hill, over the next hill. It's hiding out
Be able to visualize where it would potentially be. Yes.
Yeah. You have to have a three-dimensional map of your hunting territory, and you have to be able to, okay, where the fuck did that deer go?
Exactly. Yes.
It probably went over there. Oh, yes. I can see some freshly disturbed grass, a broken branch. Let's go that way. Then it has probably run off there.
It's used to fix null pointer exceptions.
Yeah. So, and then you go into the thing that you get too close, the deer fucks off in like a racing car.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and it runs and runs and runs until it can't see you anymore, and then it stops. It's exhausted. Its heart is beating like a jackhammer, and it's overheating. And then just when it feels safe, there you fucking are again.
The fucking monkey walks out of the brush again. Yeah.
Yeah, it comes like slow running at you, and you're like, what the? And off it goes.
A horror movie for a deer. Yeah.
There they are again. How did they find you? You ran like for half an hour. So that's essentially the mode of hunting for humans, and also built for hunting with tools. Yeah.
In his part 2, let's move on. I suppose from the evolutionary stuff. Is when he gets into agricultural stuff, and that's where most of his romanticization of some of it is in the first part, but it really kicks off in the part 2 of Sapiens, where he talks about how societies basically gets built around agriculture.
He starts waxing lyric about the wholesome and varied diet, the relatively short working week, and the rarity of infectious diseases, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, sure. And have you ever heard of the American short-nosed bear?
Yes. I don't have a lot of interesting things to say about his middle parts, to be honest. Like, part 2 is the agricultural revolution. There's a lot of this weird thing he does where for like 2 pages he'll just go off on a history lesson, where he's just stating history, and then he doesn't really do anything about it.
No, and then does nothing, goes off on a completely pointless tangent, and then states something completely well, and then he just lies for a page, more or less.
Right.
To get out what he wants to.
The middle parts of Sapiens are the the hardest ones, because he's really not saying a lot.
No, he just goes. He essentially just does his standard spiel.
Yes.
I mean, he also goes into blitz theory that somehow like 2 million people over a period of about 1,000 years killed. What was it, like over 80 million mammoths, stuff like that. Yeah, sure. We eradicated all the megafauna, and when we have killed all the mammoths, we had like even more of all the other creatures. Like, it's just on the face of it, it's just so fucking stupid. But
very strange, yeah.
And he does that thing again there when he goes into domestication. Like, oh yeah, the dog has been with us for like 15,000 years, very long. The only problem is that it's between 40 and 50,000 at least. That's the oldest remains found,
Mm.
quite possibly older. So again, it's these weird little lies that doesn't really seems to serve a purpose in themselves that I find
No, but they build a
charming.
picture of the whole becomes very different. But I don't see why he does it, because I read them as well, and in the back of my mind I go, wait, hang on a minute, I thought I read something else somewhere else, or remember from watching a documentary that number is wrong, right? And and it doesn't have any consequence then and there, but I suppose if you sprinkle in enough like tiny stuff, you can get away with some of the larger lies once the scaffolding is already in place.
He has I think one of those a couple of 2 pages where he essentially tries to explain these 2 to 2.5 million years of nothing, absolutely nothing. And I think it is somehow in a service of that idea that nothing happened until 10,000 years ago when the agricultural revolution came about.
Right.
People were just running around with looking at sticks and living this utopian life for a couple of million years, and then for whatever reason someone went agriculture from nowhere.
Yeah, it just
So
happened.
I think it might be in the service of the liberal position of gradualism, that everything builds upon it's an ever increasing.
It was a natural evolution that
Yeah,
agriculture
there
happened.
are no ups and downs and reversal. It's just a slow, gradual build up to the crescendo of liberal democracy. Which is a bit weird, but I guess even the liberals need their founding mythos in some way.
Yeah.
It's like you see that a lot, and especially within our circles, quote, and then for no reason at all.
Suddenly, for no reason at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dot.
Yeah.
Except he's just doing it with like agriculture and other inventions.
Yeah, it's a bit weird because he dedicates like a page to Göbekli Tepe, and he kind of like, oh, that was weird that kind of happened just like that, and then he doesn't goes nowhere with it and never mentions it again.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's just the foundation of modern agrarian society, but yeah, let's not talk too much about that. People might get ideas or ask pertinent questions.
It is one of the things that I've been thinking about, like reading him when he's trying to do this big history thing, that you kind of at the intersection of evolutionary theory and doing actual history. That like when you have like this evolutionary evil psych or this evolutionary perspective, you just have to look at where we are now and think that there was like this mechanical process that brought us here, and the mechanical process rewards adaptability. So every single thing that we do has to have some kind of adaptive reason, right? Some sort of, and then they'll just make up pretty much anything. Like the reason you have morning wood is that like the men who didn't have morning wood, they didn't reproduce before they went out to hunt bears, and then they got killed, and such. But the other side, if you're studying history, you realize that there are a lot of ups and downs and things that happens for completely arbitrary reasons and so on, and things that like absolutely are not essential or not necessary to be the way that they are in a sense. So there's a question of how do you balance out really the ideas of like the ups and downs and the arbitrariness of history with the kind of almost necessary explanation of evolution, where things have to always move towards efficiency and adaptability.
He goes into this a little bit when he is talking about all the taming and subjugation, as he uses as an interesting word, of various domesticated animals, and that this was a completely rationalistic and mechanistic idea that people we're going to do it this way, and then it had this outcome and this was good and so forth. And it's kind of as we go back into this idea that you talked about here, that things aren't really, or that sometimes things are just arbitrary. Things just happen. It wasn't really planned. And if you ever went to a natural history museum and saw a skeleton of a grown aurochs, the origin of our common cozy little cuddly cows, the idea that someone would, from a rational perspective, take a look at an aurochs and go, I'm gonna milk that thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Use it to go.
For the
plow
for the people in the audience, I'll pull up a picture here. Let me see if I can get something that has height at least somewhat relatable. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Open image. Now this is next to a small child. So you can think that this probably, I mean, that thing would probably reach me to maybe my chest, or, well, it's standing on a platform, so yeah. And those horns are quite dangerous. I was talking the other day with some friends about the phenomenon of wild hogs in Americas, and the meme of, why do you need guns? It's to kill the feral hogs that roam in the countryside, and even how much a small quote unquote feral hog can actually hurt you if they want to, and then you scale it up to this size, right?
Yeah, that's a kind of a small one. I'm gonna send you in the private chat here on StreamYards. I think this is let's see. How do you send pictures in StreamYards? Can you do that?
I don't think you can.
No, you can send URLs.
Yeah, I'll send it to you in the on Element.
Okay, yeah, sure, and I can bring it up.
You can bring it up there for an example.
This is a reconstruction. Nice.
Yeah, it's a reconstruction of a grown aurochs bull. So this is probably a female that we see the
right.
Yeah, and you can see the step ladder.
Yeah, you see the step ladder. Yeah.
Yeah, and your idea is you see that
I'm gonna go fuck with that
in the local forest and meadows and go, yeah, I can use that thing to draw my plow.
Yeah, if I just ask it nicely.
Yeah, I'm gonna write up a plan. It's like a 50-step plan. It's gonna run over 20 years, and man, this is gonna work. So I don't really think it worked exactly that way as he tries to lay it out as a completely,
and then suddenly one day for no reason at all.
Yeah, there was cow.
Yeah.
I think that the thing is much like the domestication of the dog. Certain species were probably more of an accident than a concerted effort. I mean, domestication of a goat, for example. I mean, they are naturally quite timid and not all that small animal, not all that big animals. The same of the origins of sheep, which are also sort of goat, but or rather a mountain goat. So that would have been a lot easier. But things like cows or say for example the pig. Anyone who has seen a wild boar, a wild Eurasian boar, knows that. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't fuck with those. Yeah.
No, they're probably, with the exception of bears, probably the most dangerous animal around.
Yeah. And in part 3, he gets into more societal, larger structures, empires, religions. I'm going to pull up another one just because I'm so amused by the way he uses, graphics in this book, because it all looks like someone's like trying to joke with you using forms or scientific presentations. So the subtext here is: religion is a system of human norms and values that is founded on belief in a superhuman order. The theory of relativity is not a religion, because at least so far there are no human norms and values that are founded on it. Football is not a religion, because nobody argues that its rules reflect superhuman edicts. Islam, Buddhism, and communism are all religions, because all are system of human norms and values that are founded on belief in a superhuman order. Note the difference between superhuman and supernatural. The Buddhist law of nature and the Marxist law of history are superhuman, since they were not legislated by humans. Yet they are not supernatural.
Yeah.
It's just a very funny graphic. And I just don't understand why he couldn't just write that. Why he had to create that shit post.
It's great.
Really stupid. I see a speedrunner there asked what's Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe is archaeological site in Anatolia, on the coast in modern-day Turkey. Walrus, I sent you a picture via Element to explain. Göbekli Tepe is the essentially the origin of agricultural activity within the European basin, the European and it is the origin really of modern agriculture.
There it is.
This is a small part of the site. These pillars are maybe 4 to 5 meters tall, intricately carved with bas reliefs, and the site is massive. It goes on
I was
for
going to say, is this the place that's sort of considered the oldest, civilization that we have record of, or am I thinking of something else?
No, this Göbekli Tepe is essentially a cult site. There is no, there are no cities, there are no habitations around.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking of something else.
Yeah. No, this site essentially appears out of nowhere in the archaeological record by the end of the Younger Dryas period, so 12,000 years ago. And it's a bit of a conundrum for modern archaeology, because it essentially put a very large hammer in all their existing theories. Because the thing is that you can quite rapidly see that most of the say wheat sorts that are dispersed through the Fertile Crescent at this point originate at this site. And the thing is that there is no agriculture in the area before the erection of this site. So the site more or less is erected, and then from it flows the ideas of agriculture, domestication of animals, and probably rudimentary metalworking. So essentially the site is a place not perhaps religious, but rather a place of technology transfer. And the thing is that after it ceased to be active, it was ritually buried. That is why it is so well preserved, because it was intentionally buried to be preserved.
Interesting.
And the interesting thing is that the site was active for almost 800 years, and you can trace through the strata of the layers, because it was expanded with more pillars, more areas, and the oldest ones are the best, so to speak. As the site is expanded over the centuries, the craftsmanship is poorer, the bas relief carvings become more primitivistic, the pillars become smaller. So essentially what you see is a degradation in craftsmanship. So what the leading theory is essentially that what you have here is that the first generation that put up the first core of the site is essentially the one who has the working knowledge, and everyone is essentially then trying to keep it alive.
Imitating it, yeah.
Yeah, they are imitating it, but the pressures of the lifestyle that they are living means that they don't have the time or the tools to emulate the high skill level of the initial impulse that are coming in here.
The giants who walk the earth, so to speak.
Yeah, yes, more or less. So
that's very interesting. I did not know about this place, but this, I mean, this has reignited my my Evolian passion for saying Atlantis is real.
Yeah, probably that the thing is that what you essentially have here is I realize that this is a massive.
It feels like a microcosm of sort of, you know, this whole perennial René Guénon, Spengler type cycle, right?
Yeah, the thing is also that one should remember here that the end of the Younger Dryas is essentially the end of the Ice Age. This is to frame this so people understand what we're talking about here, and the idea, rather not the idea, but the scientific record rather would state that as this is the end of the Dryas Age, this site essentially comes up after that the what is called within the archaeological record meltwater pulse 1A and 1B that raises the sea level by almost 30 meters over the course of less than a couple of hundred years, and the pulses show that the sea level came up in two distinct pulses from marine archaeology, and they probably in less than a month. And this is probably the origin of the various flood myths.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's something that a lot of records mention, isn't it?
Yeah, and the meltwater pulse 2B, 1 or 1B is a little bit diffuse, but 1A, you know, is essentially now been confirmed, coming from that a massive bombardment of meteorites coming out of the toroid meteor stream that the Earth passes through once in early summer and once in December, twice a year. It's an asteroid belt from a massive ruptured comet that Earth passes through twice a year. And that cometary debris from this one came into the Earth's gravity well and impacted the Laurentide ice sheet that was over Canada and Greenland in a massive bombardment that essentially was the equivalent of, I think, 5 times the current nuclear arsenal of all countries on Earth.
Jesus. Yeah.
So, and this essentially is what carved out the Grand Canyon and the large scablands in Northern America when this wall of water just went out into the Pacific.
Yeah.
And you can see 3 foot high black matte layer, as it is called, over Northern America, parts of Europe and Siberia, where it rained mud, feet of mud, by this ejecta coming up into the atmosphere and then falling down. And you can find like these large debris fields of just mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and other megafauna just been ripped to shreds, and they have looked like when you examine the long bones, they are filled with pellets from essentially they shot
From this
look
event.
like they've been shot with a grape shot, and it's full of rare earth minerals, essentially asteroid impacts that have impacted, exploded, like
and then rained back down on the
yes,
earth, basically.
like grenades.
Jesus.
And the shock waves have just ripped them apart. And you can find these enormous drifts of animal remains in Northern America and southern Canada at dig sites. So we can make do a stream on this one.
Yeah,
but
this is a whole different topic that we need to look into, because this sounds very cool.
Essentially,
else.
the place that just appears from this one, and it might be interesting to think that marine archaeology has also found enormous megalithic sites within the Mediterranean basin of what pre this raising of the sea levels were essentially coastal plains.
Yeah. Okay, I think with that we should go on to the fourth part of Sapiens, which is when he gets into the modern era with the scientific revolution and economy.
Yes, and the mentality of conquest, as he calls it.
Yes, and the the greed of capitalism and all of that. This is where I feel like this is where he is most sort of brazen about his personal views. Like he puts aside the historian here and just sort of goes into opinion mode quite often. I have another of these graphs I just have to show. Give me a moment here. Here it is. It is how the pre-modern and the modern economy works. So there's little trust in the future, which means little credit, which means slow growth, which means little trust in the future, and so on. And in the modern economy, this is Harari's explanation for why the GDP just keeps growing. There's much trust in the future, there's much credit, there's fast growth, which means there's much trust. Big trust, big credit, big growth. America number one.
Yeah.
Some guy just walked into all of the governments in the world and pitched this stuff. It's like, this is where we are right now here on the left. We want to be on the right there with like big credits, and it just fast growth and everything. It's just a giant bubble, guys, who just keep pumping the machine. And
Yeah. Let's
I think Harari is an economist.
happen.
Nordhuger says, imagine if economics actually worked like that. Yes. Now there is some merit to keeping the economy small in that sense, but this is a very, very simplified view of economics that is it's not going to hold up to scrutiny. No. I don't know if you have any comments on this last part of the book, Leo.
I mean, it's really hard to have a pivot statement on the end of this book, because it's so meandering. I mean, he has like the chapter on chemical happiness and how we should do this and that, and what was it? He scribbled was like, nothing captures the biological argument better than the famous New Age slogan, "Happiness begins within."
Yes, that's a very good quote, actually. Yeah,
powerful position. None of this will bring you happiness. Lasting happiness come only from serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. Like, okay then. And then he starts talking about Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. So it's like,
Yeah, he does. This is very strange because he's just sort of talked about how
Yeah.
this is going to be great, and then he references Huxley, who says, "No, this is going to be hell."
yeah, and then he frames it within the context of like the meaning of life.
Yeah, and he pulls a weird like, "Yeah, but we're going to be really nice to you guys."
Yeah. Oh boy. Oh boy.
It did not fill me with confidence. Let me put it like that. And there is some, he talks about. I don't want to, just rag him on him in that sense, because he does cover things like scientific revolution. When, he's not too bad when he's just like listing off his history stuff. I mean, it's not very interesting, but he'll just, I'm going to talk about, how steam power was invented for like 4 pages randomly, which is like, okay, it's not, I'm not having a bad time, but I'm not really learning anything either. So why am I here, right?
Yeah, and then he goes into this, I think he has this kind of rant, which is essentially eugenics, but he frames it within that...
Is the whole, like, the last Tasmanian bit?
No. This is about how he goes into the selective breeding of chickens, so that they can introduce new characteristics.
Oh, yeah. This
blah,
is his
blah,
whole
blah.
anti-capitalist rant that leads into the veganism.
Yeah, and it's like, dude, what the hell? So it's like, and I think it took up was like you remember in the he talks about within this context. I think it's you remember in the early noughts, after the early 2000s, when there was this rage among gene scientists to make bioluminescent animals, like the fish and I think and the rabbit and stuff like that is fucking horrible. Like, look what we can do. It's like, yeah, please don't.
Yeah. It was after they did the cloning, the bioluminescent was the next thing.
Yeah, I think the idea was that was to view how you could bridge certain genomic traits from, I think they took it from jellyfish or something like that, and enter it into other organisms to make them, and then tinker with the rest, to make them hairless and stuff like that, so you can actually see the bioluminescence and stuff like that. And he's also starts talking about cybernetic engineerings and cyborgs, and then just drops it and doesn't do anything else with it. It's like, okay.
Yes,
again, I will restate
ends very strangely.
He needs a fucking editor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's having, at the end of the book, I don't want to, make a meme out of it, but it feels like he just sort of like sat down in my kitchen and started talking, and that's the entire book, right? And, I've just let him rant for like 5 hours.
Yeah, more or less. And Nordhaus says they're making the frogs glow. Yeah, they're not gay, just gay. They're actually glowies as well. I think if Glow in the Dark is still around here, he could appreciate that.
Yeah, he could probably confirm.
Yeah, he might have been through that lab.
Yes, I think that's a brief overview of the Sapiens book. It's I suppose I suppose that's also why it became so popular, because if you live within the truth regime of today, this all makes a lot more sense to you than if you don't. And so it's a very easy read. He obviously knows how to convey information, and I gave him a hard time for his graphs, but they're very easy to understand for someone who doesn't want to spend too much brain power understanding graphs.
I think this is Because I remember, some of the midwits at work were raging about this when it came out. So I think it was then I got my copy because they said, "Oh, you gotta read this," and I threw it. I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is your impression, but I mean, usually with books like this that become bestsellers, where they're actually bought and sold among these midwits, usually they'll just read the first part. And because I had one at my job as well, who recommended this book to me, and that's why I read it. But he had only read the first part, and he was just talking about this sort of how bad agriculture was and how hunter gatherers was just was awesome. And of course, there's a lot in this book, but it seems like after
That
you
is
get through
that
the
is a
first,
good point, because
yeah.
that's my impression too of when I've talked to people who have read this book. That's usually the thing they bring up.
Yeah, I don't think they have read the last, sub chapters about the bionic life forms, the singularity, and the bio-Leninism stuff. I think they kind of tapped out before it got really dark.
Yeah, maybe.
So yeah.
But yeah, segueing
Okay.
into Homo Deus here, because it has very much the same type of structure here. That I think the only part of the Homo Deus that the average midwit reads, which is just the first part. So I mean, it's split into like 4 parts, just like Sapiens. Although it's formally categorized to 3 parts with an intro. And like the intro part that people actually read, it's called like the New Human Agenda, where he builds up certain ideas. Some of, I mean, most of it I find quite ridiculous, but it's written in such a way that it's very much attention grabbing, very much something you can talk about around the water cooler, and almost a little bit clickbaity in a sense. So in the New Human Agenda, he sort of breaks down, in a sense, what he says is, okay, what was the human issues? If you look back at the 1,000 years in the past with the more traditional belief systems, like he talks about, Abrahamic religions and so on. I mean, what was the big issues that they were trying to solve, and that has plagued humanity? And he brings up 3 things. It basically is war, and it is famine, and it is disease, right? So it's like the 3 horsemen, or it actually is the 4 horsemen, because he talks about death as well. So it's like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It sounds very poetic that way. And he goes on and talks about how, like, the old belief systems, like the Abrahamic religions, whether or Islam or the Hinduism and Buddhism, it's all sort of basically coping mechanisms in a world where that is fraught with basically, high child rates of mortality, a lot of disease that is uncontrolled. They don't know how to deal with wars that seem to be plaguing people constantly. And in a sense, I mean, this is this kind of super broad brush strokes way of talking about this that also underbuilds this kind of shitlib worldview, in a sense that, like, this is all the awful things that were happening in the past, and we were able to transcend this through the Enlightenment values, and the like you showed the economics graph, that we went
Yeah.
from the low trust stuff into the high trust, high credit growth thing. That's how we got out of it.
Gotta keep pumping.
But he presents it in this materialistic way, where the only thing people want is to have more pleasure and less pain. And like the old belief systems were not able to deliver on, basically making life less painful. Like the God of the Old Testament was not able to cure diseases or stop the wars and so on, even though people kept praying. So when people were able to shift over to this this kind of growth mindset and this more humanist view, that's where you have this kind of explosion into this new era where there are more people dying of obesity than there are dying of hunger. And like, we have all these great vaccines, and there's a lot of praise for the World Health Organization there, which is of course typical. You have to like go through the go through the standard kind of globalist issues,
Of
where
course.
epidemiology is one of them, of course. There's this interesting point, by the way. I mean, he has this the chapter or the sub chapter in the New Human Agenda that's called Invisible Armadas, where he talks about epidemiology and all of these problems that were fixed because of vaccines. And he actually makes the case that he talks about the AIDS epidemic, and he says that if I'll just quote here, just think of what would have happened if AIDS had erupted in 1581 rather than 1981. In all likelihood, nobody back then would have figured out what caused the epidemic, how it moved from person to person, or how it could have been halted, let alone cured. Under such conditions,
It's
AIDS might have
I've just gotten like a tweet that, you know, both Semiogog and Charlemagne have gotten in some trouble for being too spicy on the platforms recently. So I remind you guys that we're now in election season of social media. before you do anything fat posty.
That in such an environment, the HIV virus would not have propagated very far.
Yes, that was my
yeah,
my
I mean,
thought as well.
it's so bizarre to me, and that's why I sort of think he's very colored by the fact that he is gay himself. Like he can't just like see the idea that okay, back then, I mean, you know, if it is true what he says that they believed in scripture, like in very deep belief in scripture, it wouldn't be hard to see. Even though they didn't know about germ theory and so on, they would have basically blamed people like him, and they would have been right. So it would have been stopped pretty quickly. I mean, if you can say anything about like the value systems from more of these traditional religions, is that they were able to safeguard a lot of those types of epidemics from happening.
Yeah, well, the executions would have put a definite stop to the spread.
Stop the spread. This is how they did it back then.
A week to flatten the curve.
I mean, oh yeah, of course. So then you have the epidemiology, the disease, the war stuff, which of course he attributes very much to like the modern kind of post World War II. You know, the American hegemony and so on that's allowed trade to sort of flourish, and because of all the trade and the complexity and so on, there's less war, at least in these types of spheres. And he'll talk about the intelligence economy, which is basically, I mean, this book was written, I think, in 2016, and there's a lot of it that doesn't hold up very well. When he talks about, you know, now like the main value is intelligence and knowledge, and like all these Google engineers that have all the value in their heads, so there's no incentive to go and rob people or to start wars and so on. And it's like, okay, I mean, who do you want to be? And you know, there's not going to be any problem when you outsource all the hardware manufacturing to one part of the world, and you just have a bunch of brains sitting in the other part. And you know, there's never gonna be any conflict here, right? I mean, at that point, I think maybe this was even before Trump got elected, because it seems like they just assumed this neoliberal project was going to go on forever. I mean, that's pretty much the kind of one of the premises of this book, that it's the trends that were going on, they're just going to keep going on into like 100 years into the future, and that's going to result in a type of transhumanism.
Yeah. The gradual march of history will always continue in one direction. The right side of history will always win, and blah 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 as they go on. The absolute body blows to the liberal world order that we have seen this last 6 or 7 years perhaps hadn't landed yet.
No, they hadn't. I mean, this was right before. I think it was before Trump, and then it's before for the COVID stuff, and the, you know, with the Ukraine. I mean, there's with China, the rise of China, and all that stuff. I mean, it hadn't really sunk in at this point. So there's so many of these problems that, I mean, it doesn't hold up very much in that sense. There are other parts of the book that does hold up when he's talking about, like you said, the servant class, or the class of useless eaters, in a sense, where not because we don't have stuff for them to do, but there seems to be kind of a growing class of people who they just don't want to work anymore, right? They just want to kind of sit at home and do cooking and video games and just kind of check out of society. And I mean, it's not because of obsolescence in a sense, but they are just kind of completely plugged out.
Adam Friended will be put in the cyber mines in Harari's future.
No, he's going to keep being a streamer, this high value occupation. Okay. So, I mean, then he goes into, he starts talking about death, and he does concede the point that, in spite of all of the medical advancements that have happened, we haven't really extended the natural lifespan that far. It's really just that there's a certain amount of people that would have died in like childhood, during childbirth, say, in the 30s and 40s and so on. But I mean, you still had people in the past that would grow to be 90, 100, 110 years old, who were extremely robust, and that's where he gets to the point that the low-key based point that I mentioned, where he said, like, because of these pressures, the average person in the past was healthier, basically. So, but I mean, it's not really implied here, but he made me sort of think about bio-Leninism in this chapter, where he talks about all of these people who probably would have died at an earlier age if it wasn't for some type of medical intervention, and now we have a very large chunk of the population now that are basically being kept alive by modern science, and it's not a Nietzschean thing. It's very much a kind of bio-Leninist idea. Especially, I mean, you think about people like Movie Bob and so on. That's what I was thinking about when I was reading it. That's kind of the miracle of modern science, is that we have like 2,000% more movie bobs than we would have had otherwise, but we don't have
yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah.
the wise elders.
So freaking happy. Yeah.
It makes me dance with joy.
But I mean,
Thank you.
reading
it, thank you.
I mean, of course, you could sit and criticize the kind of history bits more factually, but I do, on some sense, agree with him and think about some of these points where I think it is true in a sense that a lot of the appeal to, say, traditional religious life and having like a traditional religious metaphysic is being kind of embedded in a world that is more of an existence minimum. In a sense, that's not affluent, where you're more kind of in touch with very hard material realities. The death and so on.
But that's my point. He and especially in the later parts of *Sapiens*, he basically goes on this rant on this crusade against the speeding up of our society that's happened the past, let's pull a number out of a hat, 200 years, right? And what baffles me again is that instead of saying, all right, so we have for the past 200 years, totally went off the reservation compared to what, we are built for, spiritually and physically. So instead of trying to sort of figure out what worked before and try to at least, look to that as possible solutions, his solution is to just, no, we'll just, we have to go faster and then, somehow use some sort of demonic technological device to get us out of this.
Yeah, he presents a lot of these things like, say, like the progress of capitalism and the growing GDP as like this inevitable process, like this, it just has to keep growing, and all of these sort of what you consider natural factors in this system, they just keep pushing in one direction, regardless. So it's sort of pointless to try to fight against that or try to put a stop to the system. We just have to lean into the progress, quote unquote. So.
Walrus, can you pull up Julius Flavius' little message there from the chat?
Which one of them?
The first one, the long one, rather. That one, yeah.
The meaning of life in these modern civilizations, people arbitrarily construct an unnatural way of being that lacks a relationship to his deepest forces, to become what one is not, breaking all limits to make everything possible for everyone.
Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah, it is, that is essentially the convergence of these ideas.
It is
complete atomization, complete deracination, essentially the creation of a wage-seeking, rent-seeking, nomadic. Well, to use a Marxist term, lumpenproletariat.
Ah, yes, that's a good word, actually.
Nice.
Not even workers, but just
yeah.
What would it be in English? Trash proletariat, perhaps.
Yeah, I suppose that's the the closest. But I mean, I think people who are aware of Marxist thought have heard the word lumpenproletariat before. I had something here in my notes, but just keep going. Maybe I'll bring it back.
Yeah, so
find it.
finishing up this chapter when he's gone through like the four horsemen of the apocalypse and how we've now defeated the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So he asks, okay, what's the next frontier for human beings? And there's two then sections here that are, I mean, he really leans into them, I think, to just to sell the book basically. The first one is then the right to happiness, where he talks about the kind of shifting attitude towards happiness, and that now that we've defeated the four horsemen of the apocalypse thanks to science and humanism and so on, we've just kind of abandoned the old gods, and now we're kind of embracing what he calls the Epicurean attitude. That, I mean, Epicurus is one of these Greek philosophers that the new atheists like to quote. I think he talked about this sort of, if God is what's that quote? If God is malevolent, then he I don't remember it. Let's see if I can find it.
Just for anyone curious, Monophthalmos has the literal translation. And if I remember correctly, he's German or something, so...
So here, is God willing to prevent evil but not able?
Thinking of someone else.
Yeah. Then
Sorry,
he's not
Monophthalmos, if I misremembered. Sorry, continue, Luddic.
Yeah. No, the quote that I know Epicurus from is from is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. If God is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence come evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? Right. So he is one of the Greek atheist philosophers who is like this sort of proto. What do you call like this proto utilitarian? Proto hedonist in any sense. I think Spengler basically says that this is like the Greek version of atheism.
The Greek proto Sojak.
But of course he says that like this attitude was extremely fringe in the old world, but now the attitude that the God doesn't exist, so you should just try to be happy, has become like the standard attitude to have. And not only the standard attitude to have, but it's been expanded because Epicurus basically said that this is something the individual is supposed to do. Like, you're just supposed to focus on yourself and try to be happy in the moment. But now this has become the goal of governments. Let's say like with GDP and the goal of the economy at large, which is basically trying to satisfy as many needs as possible. Even brings up some of these.
It creates a like permanent connection between the state and the people, right? Because they create the. I mean, making a sick populace gives you mandate and reason to sort of keep them on the treadmill, right?
Line must go up.
Yes.
How otherwise will you ever be able to pay for, your fully automated luxury communism?
Yeah, that's where
all those pills.
Yeah, on the pills, by the way. I mean, there's, if you could bring up the quote sheet there, there's some very insidious quotes and conclusions that he comes to in terms of this kind of human happiness projects.
Let me see here.
So it's if you go under basically the new human agenda, then the right to happiness, and then there's on kids and Ritalin.
By the way, that's such a nefarious fucking term, the human happiness project. Just taste on those syllables. I mean, that is, I don't know what to call it, but downright satanic.
Yeah.
The human
I agree.
happiness project. Jeez.
On kids and Ritalin. If science is right and our happiness is determined by our biochemical system, then the only way to ensure lasting contentment is by rigging this system. Forget economic growth, social reforms, and political revolutions. In order to raise global happiness levels, we need to manipulate human biochemistry. And this is exactly what we have begun doing over the last few decades. 50 years ago, psychiatric drugs carried a severe stigma. Today, that stigma has been broken. For better or for worse, a growing percentage of the population is taking psychiatric medicines on a regular basis, not only to cure debilitating mental illnesses, but also to face more mundane depressions and the occasional blues. Now, I want to add, because I mean, I'm disgusted just reading this part. they don't cure the problem. They just make you addicted to the pills instead. Okay. For example, increasing numbers of school children take stimulants such as Ritalin. In 2011, 3.5 million American children were taking medications for ADHD. In the UK, the number rose from 92,000 in 1997 to 786,000 in 2012. The original aim has been to treat attention disorders, but today completely healthy kids take such medications to improve their performance and live up to the growing expectations of teachers and parents. Many object to this development and argue that the problem lies with the education system rather than with the children. If pupils suffer from attention disorders, stress, and low grades, perhaps we ought to blame outdated teaching methods, overcrowded classrooms, and an unnaturally fast tempo of life. Maybe we should modify the schools rather than the kids. It is interesting to see how the arguments have evolved. People have been quarreling about education methods for thousands of years. Whether in ancient China or Victorian Britain, everybody had his or her pet method and vehemently opposed all alternatives. Yet, hitherto, everybody still agreed on one thing. In order to improve education, we need to change the schools. Today, for the first time in history, at least some people think it would be more efficient to change the pupils' biochemistry. Jesus fucking Christ. Oh. I disavow.
Wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is some of the most dystopian stuff, in the book, basically. And this is also one of the chapters I feel like he's not really addressing kind of the counter argument here and sort of the problems with, as you said, basically. I mean, yeah, of course you can think that you have chemicals inside your body that make you happy. Okay, conceded. But I mean, this is supposed to be in response to like an actual objective real life situation. And if it's not in response to that, I mean, the problem is not going to go away. Even if you keep having the experiences, you're still somewhat aware of objective reality. Like you have a good feeling, but you're still aware of the fact that this is induced by some drug. And it's not exactly
for now. But I mean,
not,
if Harari had his way, you would just sort of like rip out that part of your brain, right?
Yeah, I mean, so if you think nothing has any value outside of pleasure, like this is the logical conclusion, like that you're just stuck in this kind of pleasure box, and you're not supposed to have any relation to objective reality at all. It's just supposed to be like one consciousness experiencing, pleasure forever. And he doesn't, say it that explicitly, but it has to be kind of inferred from the stuff that's written.
There's a secondary, or perhaps a primary level of problem with this kind of reasoning that he's going through here. And you see this with more modernist philosophers and people, as we say, that belong to the techno. What did we call it now again? The
Techno globalists.
Yeah, the techno globalist factions of the cathedral. And that is the problem, that they somehow have managed to be captured by their own rhetorical device. And that is the rhetorical device of the brain as computer. This is essentially like something that comes up in the late 90s, that you start to equate the human mind, like think of it as a computer. It runs different programs, it has a processing speed, and it has logical fault loops that will make it go blue screen in certain, and this kind of analogy.
I seem to recall you can find theorizing about this from the old sort of original hacker movement, but of course from the other way around, saying that, in the future, the state is going to be able to program you, basically.
Yeah. There's a small thing with this. And that is that this is essentially come into, I mean, if you talk to like a normie on the street and you start spewing this kind of thing, they will go, yeah, it's like a computer. It does things and it has a processing and speed and stuff like that. So it has permeated culture. the small problem is that it's now gone to the level of like drinking your own Kool-Aid. It has gone
Exactly.
into the
Yeah.
system, and now it's come around that they actually believe this kind of really ham-fisted and really bad analogy, to kind of used as a way to kind of dumb down and simplify the concepts of human consciousness. But we are now running into the central problem of this kind of analogy is that it has nothing to do with reality.
Exactly.
The problem is that the human brain is not a computer. And I mean, if you look at the primary research done within neuroscience and applied mathematics, from the likes of, if some of you know who Sir Arthur Penrose is, which is the world's premier mathematician, more or less. And he's been working on this for like the last 15 years.
You mean Roger Penrose, right?
Yeah, Sir Roger Penrose.
Yeah. I think you said Arthur, just in case anyone.
Yeah, no. It's, if some of you of the audience perhaps follows some kind of science awards, there's the Penrose Medal, for example, within mathematics and physics. And there is a good interview. We'll see if we can find it sometime. It will come up in future discussion, I'm sure. But the thing is that he more or less looked into cognition from a mathematical perspective, realized that he didn't know about enough about neuroscience. So he just stopped his work and dedicated like 5 years to becoming a neuroscientist, because this is the man, for the layman to understand, he's a contemporary of Stephen Hawking, and Stephen Hawking thought that, well, he was the much smarter one of them.
He was the big-brained boy, yeah.
Yeah, he was the real big brain boy, the cross-disciplinarian who did all the things.
Yeah.
But since he didn't have the quite dramatic life story that Hawking had, he never got the limelight. No. He was just a genius and a well-adapted one at that, and he didn't like public attention, so to speak.
Right.
But to get to the point is that he essentially then have come to the point that he's very vehemently against the idea that consciousness is computation. He's saying that no, consciousness is not computation. Consciousness somehow emerges within the atypical structure of the brain's neuron and neuron transceivers, because something about the structure of how the cell is built up means that it can encode quantum data upon the atoms that it's built up from, because of somehow how this fold does a subdimensional fold of the structure. But this in itself is not computation. Rather, it seems like it's what do you call it in computer science? It's a layer between two systems.
Interfacing?
Yeah, it's an interface system rather. So Sir Arthur Penrose believes rather that the neuron is essentially more like a radio transceiver than a computer in itself.
Yeah, that's very well put. And I mean, I just wanted to sort of add to that when I talked about, like the techno-globalists and guys like Harari, who sort of see themselves as being outside of history, right? That's sort of how they see. They're just objective, and they can just see everything outside of history. And even in this book Homo Deus, he will mention the fact that in the Middle Ages, people would talk about the mind and the consciousness as a book, because that was the premier technology. And that was just, look how stupid they were. Like, they thought the mind was a book, ha. And then he'll move on to the industrial age. Well, then people thought the mind was an engine, like the steam engine, and the body was a steam engine. Look how stupid they were, ha, right? And then now they're like, oh, yeah, the mind is like a computer. Oh, it's just like that.
Yeah, but we know a lot better these days, Luddic.
We know better, right?
Yeah, we're the smart ones now. We have movie bobs.
there's nothing wrong with this analogy. Like, there's no pattern going on here that we're mistaken in some way. Like, the stuff that we know now, that's just objectively correct, and we have to follow that. We can't look at that critically. It's very bizarre, but this is how he actually thinks. I mean, when I spell it out this way, it sounds absolutely weird, but I mean, when you two have read him, you probably recognize like this pattern is that he will spell out the argument and then he'll just go with the retarded conclusion anyway.
I think I saw a tweet that someone made about modern media that I think speaks to this point, and he said that modern writers are completely incapable of writing a person or a character more interesting and intelligent than themselves. End quote. I think that essentially what we have here. It is like someone who can speak all the words, all the buzzwords, who can read all the books and collate the data, but in the end he's unable to grasp what all this actually means. He can't go further than himself.
Yeah.
No, exactly. I'll see if I can just finish up the first chapter.
That is a big sort of thing. We talk about like society as a whole, if you want to do like blackpilling about bio-Leninism and stuff, and you notice that in more and more people, that ability to go beyond yourself, both in theorizing, to be able to look outside yourself is disappearing.
Yeah.
Talk about feminization of society, right?
Indeed. But I think this also is, speaking of his political or socio-political class within the cathedral, is that all of these little projects that they have running and this kind of neuromancer pipe dream that they have, that we will become immortal because we will upload ourselves to the cloud. I think that once they start going forward with that Neuralink kind of interface to try to make this reality, they are going to be sorely disappointed and to realize that it just doesn't work. There's nothing to upload. Well, perhaps a screaming monkey that just wants to fuck it and do nothing else. All the higher cognition doesn't work because there's a component that they can't see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
or
no,
it's
I
just
think
some of its parts they can't replicate, right?
No, what I think what's going to happen is that they will spend a lot of processing power uploading some type of program that can repeat quotes and things that they said when they were alive. It's going to have nothing to do with their consciousness or their experience or anything, but you'll just keep a sort of footprint from a person.
And to be fair for Harari, I have seen clips of him saying that, people are afraid of AI. No, they're not afraid of AI. They're afraid of artificial consciousness, and we are nowhere near artificial consciousness. And he even says, I don't think we're ever going to be able to make that.
No, I mean, he goes very much in the other way. He doesn't believe in uploading consciousness. He basically starts deconstructing the value of consciousness itself. He says sort of, what's the point of consciousness? And that's something you get
right.
into.
And again, he says something based, and then he ends up like being a retard anyway. How does he do it?
He can't help himself.
He can't keep getting away with it.
No, Walrus. We come back to this always. It is the based position. You are what you are. You can't be more than you are.
So, but I mean,
Right.
if you look up my quote sheet again, he has one of these shitposting diagrams on consciousness, since we're jumping around a little bit anyway. If you go on, basically it's under the human spark, and then on consciousness, if you can bring that up. So it is extremely kind of shitposty. Is what happens in the mind that doesn't happen in the brain? Nothing. So why do we need the mind? And then okay, we'll go to write something. Where does it happen in the brain? And then it just goes back to the
right.
Back to
explain that one, theists.
Well, this is also generally the people who have like this kind of materialist worldview problem, is that they can't the consciousness becomes a problem for them. So you have guys like Daniel Dennett and people who will just try to explain that no, you don't actually have consciousness. It's just some random noise that's firing off in your brain. It's not real in a sense. So we'll just remove it from the equation because it creates too many problems for the tidy models that we've created.
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting thing. You had one of those. I think it was Descartes, that one of the Enlightenment philosophers, that went into this. What is consciousness, and then stated categorically that consciousness exists within the pineal gland of the brain.
Okay.
This is true.
Yeah, and then when they try to like, okay, let's just dissect the brain of a dead person. What is this? And he just made the absolute take of, well, of course you can't see, could do it now. He's dead.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, and if you can't look at it without the person being dead. So how are you going to refute this statement?
So I'm right,
So,
but talk about snake oil salesman, huh?
Essentially, just an inverse God of the gaps argument. That he essentially had no idea, but thought that he needed to make a materialist statement upon consciousness, to refute God, but backwards. So he just, it's a thing, and it's in this part of the brain creates it.
Yeah.
So it's just
The
bullshitting.
important thing is that you have belief and faith that it exists, of course.
Yeah. As opposed to belief that cognition comes from your soul that is given to you by God, and
Obviously, yes.
can't believe that. That's backwards.
I think Descartes was Christian, right? He wasn't an atheist.
I was an Enlightenment philosopher, so he was nominally, that thing.
Yeah.
But the thing was something about, if I remember correctly, I think it was something about how does the soul express itself through the material body and with cognition and blah blah blah. And he just let's see here. Let's roll a d6. The pineal gland. Prime suspect.
I mean, we did touch on, I think, Descartes a little bit on the Sam Harris stream, but he also did run into the problem of trying to explain that he said that you have the spirit, or like this consciousness, in the pineal gland, and then you have the body, which is basically deterministic, and then you have to explain how exactly does one thing interact with the other, and this is also something he was never able to explain. Like, he has all of these kind of very, he does his correspondences with a lot of royalty and people who could read at the time who were asking him about this, and he was just, there's a lot of mental gymnastics to try to explain away.
Yeah, Monophthalmos has a good quote in chat there.
I was going to bring it up. It's the same phenomenon as Linkola. The autism makes him take sightseeing trips to based places, but he never stays. That's pretty. It just annoys me how someone can be, so often correct in their analysis and then just deliberately take the wrong outcome.
Yeah, it's like he wanders into the gated off. He's on the big X marks the spot of base territory.
Right.
He almost has it, and then he wanders off back again into liberalism. Off into the hedges, and it's just gone. It's like, for fuck's sake, man! I've been for like 3 chapters walking.
You were right there. You just had to dig.
No, you just have to look where your fucking feet are. But no, then it just meanders off into the distance.
Oh God!
He's aggressively frustrating writer, I must say.
Yeah.
But I think this is something that the distributist described in the video when he was talking about like the Sam Harris, clips that have emerged from the trigonometry interview, where he basically said, if you're going to be a public intellectual today, the conversation is basically on the rails. I mean, there is a certain final destination that you're going to reach if you want to have best-selling books and be a part of the cool kids click. So you can take some detours, but you're going to end up at the same place anyway. You're gonna basically, support this kind of shitlib world order and be moving on to the next kind of more transhumanist world.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I don't want to
even though
sound too grandiose or anything, but it feels like the only way you can actually, get some real opinions these days are in our spheres, because you actually have to sort of risk being wrong, right?
Yeah, I mean, you find people who have less to lose.
I mean,
and they
where
can
else
speak
in
a little bit more
society can you
freely.
risk being wrong in a significant way, right?
Yeah, you can't. If you score too many, it's like if you step the bound too many times, they just kick you out, right? You lose access to that network and to get your ideas out there. But yeah, we're just okay. I'm just going to try to get through the rest of the book.
Yeah, sorry, we memed a bit too much.
I mean, it's all good stuff, but I don't know. I don't want to go for like 5 hours, so we'll let's see what I can do with the rest here. I mean, the end of the chapter is like he has this kind of subsection about the human beings becoming gods, which I think is the most kind of memeable part of the entire book. But then again, the book doesn't exist without this chapter, because I mean, it's called Homo Deus, and this is sort of the only part about like the Homo Deus, the kind of transition from the Homo sapiens until these sort of god creatures, where the arguments that he makes is both from the kind of cybernetics parts, where he says that people are in this economy, they're just going to keep making more cybernetic parts for people who have problems, like say people who can't walk properly, they'll get cybernetic enhancements, and people who can't see will get cybernetic enhancements. And I mean, but the thing that's going to make the guy who can't see with cybernetics can super enhance a regular person, and like the same thing with medicine, and the same thing with like genetic engineering and so on. So he basically says that this effect is going to compound over time until human beings are basically so unrecognizable from what they are today that they become this entirely new, transhumanist god creature that's called Homo Deus.
A new Homo, yeah.
Yeah, a new type of Homo, and
Yay!
he does he does compare it to like this sort of pantheon of Greek gods, like it's the Apollos, the Aphrodites, and we're gonna like become like these.
Oh shit! This is why he's
mystical,
against monotheism. I was wondering why he was like polytheism is good, guys, in *Sapiens*. I didn't connect it until now.
Oh man!
Sorry, I just had a eureka moment.
Interesting.
No. Now to the point. Since I haven't read Homo Deus, I also thought that this was weird. But I'm sorry. What a fucking nerd!
I mean, yeah.
And this is like probably one of the least historical chapters, where he just goes into pure speculation that this is what's going to be the future. You're going to have like this pantheon of gods. It sounds almost a little bit Nietzschean if you read it the right way, but he doesn't stick on the point a whole lot. I think this is kind of like just a selling chapter of the book. And now, I mean, we're done with like the first, the new human agenda. Then he'll go into like a bit more of the actual thesis of the book. That is a lot. It's a lot darker than the first parts, even though you had the part with the kids on Ritalin and some of these other painful quotes. But let's see. This is the next part. Then it's called Part 1: How Homo sapiens Conquered the World. So then he will first go through the subchapter that's called like the Anthropocene, where he talks about kind of the development, first about the domestication of animals, where he basically says that man has basically made the world in his image, where like every animal is domesticated, and there's so little actual wildlife and competing interests to the human sphere that now we're at a point where the world is so kind of Homo sapiens centric that the kind of intersubjective belief systems have almost more power than the objective world, because it's also kind of tailored around human beings. Then he has a chapter about factory farming again, where he starts talking about how sad it is that pigs get slaughtered and how they should be free to roam around and stuff. I mean, we talked about that previously, like with the animal rights, and then he'll go through a part about like the development or the evolution of belief systems. where he says that when you go back to the hunter-gatherer era, they were animists, basically. That they had this kind of belief system that's similar to what Pocahontas has in the Disney movie, where you kind of talk to nature, like everything is seen as being like equal and on equal footing. And the
Yeah, I
human
didn't
being
bring it
has
up,
to-
but he talks about that quite a bit in *Sapiens* as well.
Yeah, and he gets it completely wrong. Like you said, Luddic, that it's everything is like in balance and on equal footing, and that's not how animism works. It is rather a system where the spirits of the elements are in constant warfare against each other and struggling for dominance. This kind of there's some kind of equalitarian spirit within animism is just modern
yeah.
sort of cringe.
You hear this kind of typical shitlib way of what do you call romanticizing animism, like, so, oh yeah, the Native American cultures, they will, when they need meat, they ask the cow, are you okay? Is it okay that we take the calf, and is it okay that we kill you, and so on? And they have to get permission from nature, and they have this really weird perception of how it works. That it seems to be like the super, nice guy type belief. But of course, I haven't read upon animism at all, really. So
No, it's essentially completely different. What essentially they have it as backwards. What you do is that, say for example, an animist that hunted an elk or something, he wouldn't oh, can I kill you? I need to eat. No, that's not how it works. What you do is that you essentially, once you have killed the animal, you honor its spirits in some kind of fair and open competition. You won, you prevailed, but you still must honor this thing because it lived, and its life will now nourish you. So it's more of a give and take relationship, and this also views that like there's a almost Nietzschean communal spirit within that you have a superseding biospirit that all elks have a part in, so to say. That there are the individual spirit of the individual elks, but then there is the elk as a concept spirit. More, like the sky is a concept
You
spirit.
thank the elk for being truly an elk and providing you with food, nourishment.
Yeah, you prevailed. So, in a sense, life begets life in a certain way.
Yeah.
So, but there is no asking for permission or asking for forgiveness or something like that. There's an honoring that you could have killed me, but I fucking killed you, and now I will live. But that doesn't mean that I'm. In a sense, it's like, how do you say this? You exalt in your victory, but you don't dance on their grave.
Hmm. Yeah, you sort of honor the cycle of the hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very good to have you on the panel for this particular reason, because there's like so many like blind spots I have in terms of history. So let's see. I mean, then he'll talk about then the transition from animism to theism, and his presentation of theism, especially with the Abrahamic religions, is that it's just a pure kind of ad hoc justification for agriculture. That you have the idea of man having dominion over the animals and in the natural world as described in the Bible, and that basically means that agriculture is justified. And so we change the relationship from this kind of friendly, asking for stuff from the animals, to now we have dominion over the animals, and we have permission from God to basically control and domesticate them, which of course is it's interesting, but it's a sort of, I find it to be quite strange, because there's a lot of parts of the Bible that I don't see this as being an endorsement of agriculture at all, really. I mean, you could look at some of the kind of what you'd say the good guys, or the main characters in the Bible, like Abraham or Jacob or David. They're all shepherds. I don't think there's any good guys in the Bible who are farmers. Basically, it's not presented as a sort of positive way to live. It's really more of like this agriculture leads to big civilization, which leads to sin, which leads to ruin, basically. I mean, even in the story of Cain and Abel, That's
I
kind of
was
like
just about to say that it's kind of interesting that all the, if you will, the prominent in the individuals within the Old Testament, at least, are essentially cast in the mold of Cain, not in the mold of Abel.
Hmm.
No, the other way around. I'm stupid.
yes, and that's
Cain
where we
Oh
get
yeah,
to
that makes more sense.
farmer,
Yeah.
and Abel is the shepherd, or the animal handling guy.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. No,
So I mean, if we go to the story of Cain and Abel, then I mean, of course, if you're on the internet at all, you have like the Jordan Peterson kind of shit take where this is about jealousy basically, and he draws this into some stupid like psychological story. But I mean, what actually happens
or
here?
you're an absolute nerd and you think
Yeah.
this is where vampires come from.
Great. But Cain and Abel are brothers, right? And Abel is a shepherd and Cain is a farmer, and they both bring up an offering to God. And Abel basically brings up like this kind of burnt meat. It's really like this kind of like low quality destroyed meat, and Cain brings up like fresh vegetables. But Cain is basically rejected. I mean, God sort of will approve of the shepherd. He approves of the meat offering, and he rejects the vegetable offering. And
Yes.
after that, then Cain kills Abel out of jealousy, and he gets the mark in a sense. So already in the beginning of Genesis, like God rejects, like basically reject vegetables, reject farming from that point. So I find it a little bit sort of selective to just say that like this is just an ad hoc justification for agriculture. In a sense, like that's kind of my two cents on that.
Yeah, it makes a. I mean, the Bible makes a kind of, if you look at that aspect across it, kind of clear distinction about the what is the high and the low. I think it says something about in the Ecclesiastic, something about they have these long remunerations of who shall have what, and like the flesh of the birds and the animals of the land are given unto blah blah blah, and essentially it makes the partitioner that the upper strata of society shall have these things, and the filthy peasants and the filthy merchants shall eat grain and carrots and nothing else because they are low. And stuff like that. Maybe not Ecclesiastes, is what I'm saying. In any case, one of those was such a long time since I read the Bible.
Yeah, same. But I did remember that part. So then he will just sort of illustrate that the next kind of step in the belief system evolution is then from theism to humanism, where it's really man exists kind of for its own sake without the need of a higher justification, and the human kind of intuition and intelligence in itself is a kind of justification, where the animals, he goes back to this sort of that's factory farming stuff, like that's where it goes from having dominion over the animals to basically, I mean, you're a human being, so you don't have to give a shit about them at all, and you can just justify any type of industrial slaughter, which he then goes on to talk about how basically Nazism is a kind of humanist ideology and so on. I mean, this is something I've never, again, the kind of vagueness of humanism that I don't know. I mean, are Nazism and communism humanist ideologies? I don't even know what to make of this stuff. I could see how sort of like liberal democracy could go into a type of humanism, but he does make the case that the communism and Nazism basically have similar core assumptions about the belief in human potentials and economic growth, kind of progressivism in a sense that underlines that belief system. So, and I mean, of course, like I said, the thesis of this book is actually to try to make the break from breaking down humanism to move into post-humanism. So let's see where he goes from there. So then we get to the part 2 that's called Homo sapiens gives meaning to the world, where he sort of goes through more of the same kind of intersubjectivity framework that I mentioned previously in the stream, where he talks about how human beings are valuable because they can tell stories, and these stories can allow societies of mass and scale, and how these stories develop and so on. Like this is where you get the elite theory stuff. And so you have this sort of 2 points here where it says that human beings are valuable in the sense that they can cooperate and they can collect information and work at scale, but the individual human being doesn't really have anything that's valuable from the humanist perspective, because it's all like every part of the like the humanist assumptions, from free will to the self to God, it's all like BS. God doesn't exist. The self as we know it is like, neuroscience has apparently shown that there's no individual. It's like just individuals, as he calls them.
The
Where
only thing that's valuable is coordination.
It's coordination and processing, right?
Yeah.
So the human being is not an individual self. It's just a collection of processes or algorithms. I mean, this is the word that he keeps kind of using, and it's really part of the sort of computer mania that we talked about previously, that he keeps just honing in on this idea that no, the human being is just an algorithm, and it's just an algorithm to reproduce itself. Like that's what evolution is, and we have to. Like that's what science says now, right? We have to reject the idea of the individual. So, let me see if I have some interesting quotes.
Let me just inject here.
Yep.
I mean, without being too famous, but what a fucking tribesman he is. I mean, if you look at essentially upon the metaphysics of that group, you can really see why the atheism is so strong within the expat community. I think a lot of Christians perhaps doesn't have a bearing on this, but there is no real heaven and hell within that religious framework. There's just Sheol, this misty place where the spirits go to fade away into nothingness over time.
Yes, I mean their religion basically is just like this kind of tribal, a type of tribal Bronze Age religion, and that sounds like it's an insult, but it's a very kind of apt explanation. They just believe in like the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The God they believe in is just sort of a patron God that's going to give them a reward in this life. There's there's nothing after that. They just have to sort of follow the maintain the covenant, as they say, and if they do that, they're promised riches and success. If not, then it's
deal.
It's over.
Yeah, it's weird also, because if you say just a Bronze Age religion, but as Bronze Age religions go, that's really rare. I mean, most religions from the Bronze Age do work within a framework, usually of life, resurrection, life, death, and resurrection. Perhaps not within the Christian context of yourself being yourself, but rather rather like the Hindu or Indo-European concept of that parts of you will always be broken off because they are not eternal, and you go into the wheel and you will come back eventually, but the part that will come back or that will survive death, perhaps, maybe, if you do it the right way and the proper rites and so forth are observed, will not be the part of you that you in life perceive as you, but rather more core elemental parts, and the you that you know as your logos, in a sense, can of course survive death intact, but that's rare and takes a lot of hard work in life to actually do. There's a lot of variance on these themes as they go around, but the idea that you just go away, fade away somewhere in some misty place doesn't really exist. It's kind of unique, actually.
Yeah, that should be a stream topic in the future. But Walrus, if you bring up the quote sheet again, there's this thing that I think would be nice to read out, just to summarize his kind of what he sees as a sort of breakaway from the liberal view, contra like what's the modern scientific
Is this the
worldview.
liberal view?
Yeah, it's the
quote thing?
in the bottom there. It's under, let's say, Homo sapiens loses control. It's the last point from the content table.
Yeah, okay, I see it. Yeah, I'm going to bring it up. The liberal view. 1. I am an individual. That is, I have a single essence that cannot be divided into parts or subsystems. True, this inner core is wrapped in many outer layers. But if I make the effort to peel away these external crusts, I will find deep within myself a clear and single inner voice, which is my authentic self. 2. My authentic self is completely free. 3. It follows from the first two assumptions that I can know things about myself that nobody else can discover. For only I have access to my inner space of freedom, and only I can hear the whispers of my authentic self. This is why liberalism grants the individual so much authority. I cannot trust anyone else to make choices for me, because no one else can know who I really am, how I feel, and what I want. This is why the voter knows best, why the customer is always right, and why beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What a fucking based takedown of liberalism, huh?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most complete takedowns I've actually seen of humanism and liberalism. Even though, I mean, I guess you could find, more of them in more kind of reactionary books, but from a book that's kind of like mainstream bookshelf thing, it's quite unusual. So if you look, if you read up the scientific modern scientific,
yeah, let's see how he fucks it up with the modern scientific view. The modern scientific view. 1. Organisms are algorithms, and humans are not individuals. They are dividuals. That is, humans are an assemblage of many different algorithms, lacking a single inner voice or a single self. 2. The algorithms constituting a human are not free. They are shaped by genes and environmental pressures, and take decisions either deterministically or randomly, but not freely. 3. It follows that an external algorithm could theoretically know me much better than I can ever know myself. An algorithm that monitors each of the systems that compromise my body and my brain could know exactly who I am, how I feel, and what I want. Once developed, such an algorithm could replace the voter, the customer, and the beholder. Then the algorithm will know best. The algorithm will always be right, and beauty will be in the calculations of the algorithm. Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate. Yeah. Sorry.
I have no mouth, and I must scream. So
every nanometer. Yeah. There was this. I watched a YouTube video on my way back home from the Distributist. They did an interview with Benjamin A. Boyce. And they talked a bit about the idea that you can remove something like power from the sort of the power dynamics from human life, from human society, being sort of the goal of the managerialism. And I feel this way here, like, because the idea was, you can't really remove the things that make the human experience the human experience. See what I'm saying? And that's like, if you remove everything that makes you a human and replace it with an algorithm, even though, you can think to yourself, yeah, I'm scientifically correct. Well, I mean, where's the human? The human is gone.
Yeah, I mean, this is reading this is kind of it made me think a lot, because even though he might make some historical mistakes or simplify certain concepts, there are, as a person who is considered myself a dissident or consider myself reactionary, yeah, I'm a little bit puzzled as to how I should approach this, because I could, try to approach, try to attack the scientific view that's presented here, but then I end up just trying to cuck for humanism, basically. So I feel like I'm put in a bit of a vice here, in terms of how to approach the problem, to the point where even if you have like the same views as Ted Kaczynski, you're basically like too humanist for this guy, right? So,
well, I mean, the reality lies outside of this dichotomy, right? Even though you might think that saying that, oh, humans aren't individualistic because, feudalism was great. Let's just, say that. Even
There's
within
also-
that, there is individualism. I mean, look up sort of Radical Liberation's medieval anarchy project, right?
Mm.
There are room for individualism within structured, organized, hierarchical societies. It's just that that individualism exists on the planes in every hierarchy.
Yeah, just let's go to the bullet points down there, because these are a bit. If you
Yeah,
go
see,
there-
these are my bull. These are not actual quotes. So yeah,
they're more like
Hide it.
summations, but
Hide it down.
yeah, but there's summations of the previous points, more or less. So that's why I think they're good, because they are good, condensations of all things, meandering ramblings. And like to say, okay, sure, like take the first one. As algorithms, no, not really. Can they be hacked, molded, and manipulated? Sure. Sure, you can do that. Different things take a different amount of effort, but yeah, sure. Still not really a value judgment, but
Yeah, humans can be manipulated.
yeah,
Big
proper.
whoop. Yeah.
Then again, there are certain parts of the human that you can't really touch, and if you try to manipulate them that way, you will get a violent reaction, because you've touched upon something fundamental that becomes really defensive if you try to fidget with it. It doesn't like that at all. And the idea here also that we don't need all the people anymore. That he also proved that we have these useless eaters. Well, they like the Bible says, the poor will always be among you. They have always existed, and perhaps they fill no other function than as a dire warning to the rest of the species that is intelligent enough to see that, okay, that's not a good idea.
but just to elaborate on then point number 2 there a little bit, because this is a sort of attack on liberalism that I've actually not been as exposed to. Where he basically he goes into it with the same type of mindset of it's just like pure, the mental intersubjective constructions are just pure pragmatism, and liberalism doesn't have any inherent value. Then he said, okay, what's the kind of like practical case for liberalism? And he says that in like the previous century of total war, you wanted to have as many people included in like the World War I and II as possible, meaning that the idea is that you give as many people as you can rights, then they will be more motivated to fight in wars to have those rights. And he says that was kind of like one of the driving factors behind feminism, was to get women into war and participating in wars, getting peasants and poor people participating, getting as many people as possible into the trenches, into factories, into like every part of the war machine, basically. But now with when you have all this kind of smart technology and this kind of hyper specialized technology, you don't need to have a total war. You only need a couple of specialists here and there to maintain the machinery and the artificial intelligence and these kind of smart missile systems, and the computer hackers, they will do the most of it. But there's no reason to try to include a large part of the populace in the same way, so you don't really need to give them all these kind of rights. It's really more of, okay, they'll just be these useless eaters who'll be on UBI and watch porn and play video games, so the rest, like these elite people, can just maintain society and so on. And that's kind of his
and fly the burning man.
So I mean, it is a surprisingly sort of powerful thought. I'd not kind of thought of liberalism in that sense, because he, to me, it's just admitting that it's just been more of kind of a moral thing, where it's seen as kind of the default moral position. But he just says that the moral position for liberalism itself is not really strong enough if it's not practically feasible. And we're seeing that with both with, like, say, the COVID lockdowns and the stuff that's going on. It's that it's not really practically feasible anymore. Like all of these people having all these rights when they can't contribute anything, it's just becoming a problem, and that's why we need to move into this kind of transhuman future, basically this sort of pod life and the these kind of AI cyborg supermen.
Jesus Christ. I'm just baffled. I keep like, how can he draw these conclusions? Like, how can he like dunk on liberalism this hard and then be like, yeah, but we just got to go harder?
It's amazing, isn't it?
I'm pushing the based and the cringe button at the same time.
Yeah, it's all just about the needs of the managerial class, right? That's what it's all about. It's just like
it is. I mean, it's the friend-enemy distinction that they get. He's just justifying this for Schwab and the cronies.
Yeah, but it's you just look at the elites in the world and the kind of problems that they have currently, and this, here's the recommendation: just drop liberalism. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is like a super. Like all of this is just dumping the PDF in an email to Klaus Schwab. Like this is what we have to do, right?
So, and there's some finishing points there. He will talk about the idea of consciousness, and that like with the graph that we looked at previously, sort of really the idea of consciousness as just a kind of pollution, basically. It's consciousness as a kind of epiphenomenon, and he says that that's like the prevailing scientific explanation, even though, as Leo Borealis says, it's not really true. Like there's a lot of competing explanations for that, but he just goes with the most kind of materialist explanation that it's just some kind of byproduct of something else, and it doesn't really have any value because these kind of non-conscious entities like artificial intelligence, they can do everything that a conscious being can do anyway. So we don't really need consciousness. We can just address the problems. So, I mean, it's just like peak managerialism. It's like, okay, you don't even need to be conscious. Like the only thing we need to do is just deal with these managerial tasks and find the most efficient way to do it. And I mean, like the human experience has nothing to do with that. It should just be discarded completely.
And we need someone to consume.
Yes.
Yes. You're just gonna eat, and of course the last part is then he talks about the dataism. That's going to be like it's kind of religious or ideological worldview where it's like data is the only thing that exists in a sense, and I mean what the computer is made of that's processing the data. It doesn't matter if it's carbon or silicone or flesh and blood. Basically, it's all just kind of computing data power, and whoever can compute the data the best and can process the information the best is who should run society. So you reach the conclusion that it's really the artificial intelligence that should be running society, basically, because they can deal with reality that is like the data better
so
than
this guy isn't a programmer.
Yes, that's one of the things too.
He is very skeptical about AI, from what I gather from like interviews.
It's a little bit on and off. I mean, there's some funny things as well that when you look, that's why I like reading about these books that are like these kind of techno optimist books where they will take a lot of examples of certain AI companies that I didn't know about. And one of them was this company called AIVA. That's a company that creates artificially intelligence generated classical music. And I listened to it. I mean, it sounds pretty convincing. He has like this entire subchapter about artificial intelligence creating art, which, I mean, we've seen it with this kind of what's the name of that AI thing that created all these funny images when you post the text and they
DALL-E.
The DALL-E, yeah, and there are other ones as well. But he says that there are similar artificial intelligences that can create music where they've sort of submitted the music to music competitions and they've been able to win and so on. And I mean, it is at least just a kind of funny thing to look into, even though if you're not convinced by his thesis in general.
Yeah, the general problem with also that when it comes to the entirety of AI and machine learning, you run into the kind of procedural problem that they can't really create. They can just amalgamate data and it has to be like a distinct prompt from a conscious actor. So what essentially is that it's AI generated. Yeah, that's all that it is. It's generated from things that humans have made. So you can't really.
I don't know what this has to do with anything, but it's pretty funny. I'm not gonna lie.
Leo sent it to me. I think it's related to the Hinduism we talked about a moment ago. I'm sorry for derailing. I can't do a Trump voice, but I hear it in my head. Huge.
The best. Well, it kind of conforms to the initial statement of it's history bigly.
Bigly, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to end it. Actually, I mean, and as you said, Walrus, he's definitely not a programmer. I mean, I've worked with a lot of these AI solutions. First of all, they don't maintain themselves. That's one thing, and they don't get better over time. They have a tendency to get worse unless you're able to actually intervene and give them a proper data. And I've seen a lot of the limits to this stuff. I mean, the world looks a lot different, I think, if you're sort of like a homosexual yuppie who live in Silicon Valley, and you're surrounded by people between 20 and 40 who are all plus 130 IQ techno optimists, and like that's your everyday life. Then it seems like the singularity is just around the corner. But if you're actually interacting with young and old people, and people who aren't that high up in society, it's you really don't get that impression. I think most places in the world.
I agree. Now, we had, you had a slide there with interview reel, but I think we've done a pretty thorough job, and it's 3 hours. So I'm thinking we're going to skip that. Unless you had any specific clips.
No, I put it in there because you showed me a lot of interviews, but I don't think we really need to. People can go look that up for themselves. I don't know if there's
it's
any.
Just going to give you more of the same.
We should look at.
I don't think there's been anything in the last couple of minutes. So I'm going to leave you guys with a link to. I have it pinned, but I'm going to post it as well. In a couple of hours, I will be appearing on a video on Jay Burden's channel. Please check that out if you have the time. I'm not going to be there because it's going to be like 3 a.m. when it goes live.
In here. I'll have a look at it tomorrow.
Yeah. But if there's any Americans listening, that's probably within your time zone. So
please
check that out if you.
Side, I think we worn them out with our incessant prattling.
Yes. It was a very nice conversation I had with Jay Burden, so I think it's good. I think you should check it out. And I would link you to someone else, but I think we have outlasted everyone else. I know Radical Liberation was streaming at some point. Prudentialist and Geo was streaming at some point. Maybe Scrump is streaming. Scrump is not streaming. He ended 1 hour ago, so we outlasted everyone else. And this is why we start as early as we do.
We didn't even go
step on anyone else's toes
this time. I mean, well, but as always when we stream, I mean, we start tangents. We have to break off the tangents, and then someone says, usually Luddic, this is a secondary stream. We'll have to continue this in its own stream.
We have to do a different stream on it. All right. Okay, guys. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Indeed. And, well, to mark upon the sad tidings tonight, God save the Queen.
Yes, and I believe that Charles III is the new King of England.
Yes, it would have been more based, of course, to have him as Charles V to acknowledge the Bonnet Prince Charlie of the House of Stuart. But alas, no such luck.
Well, good luck to all our British friends, and again, See you
Good
next
night.
week. Bye bye. Good night.
Good night.